So let's bring this meeting to order. It's the Conservation Commission, City of Newburyport, January 19th, 2021. And this meeting is being recorded. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from January 5th. I did have one comment. Gretchen, did you get that comment? I'm assuming you.
Yep,
You did. Okay.
I did.
It's regarding the discussion of the bridge at the Little River off of the Gloria or the Marlene Schrader Trail. Just one correction to that last sentence. And of course, I closed that file, so I don't have it in front of me.
You want me to find it?
Sure. Either that or I'll try and find it.
I've got it up on the screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was let me just look this up. I remember where, oh, there we go. I just wanted to add a statement saying a variance would not be appropriate for this project because there's already an existing alternative in a dry bypass trail which leads over an adjacent culvert. Basically delete the last sentence and put that sentence as the second to last sentence. Anybody else have any comments or changes? All right. We get a motion?
Motion. Second.
All right, Paul Healy,
Yes.
Steve Moore,
Yes.
Dan Warshall,
Yes.
David Vine,
Yes.
Ron DeCola.
Yes.
I vote yes. So next item of old new business, the before mentioned, well, Gloria Brownhart Nature Trail. This is actually the Marlene Schrader. It would connect the Marlene Schrader Trail to the, or at least partially, go over the Little River Bridge adjacent to the Gloria Brownhart Trail. So we have Jerry on the line somewhere.
Yeah, I just promoted Jerry to a panelist and unmuted him.
So
Jerry, you should be able to speak.
All right. Okay.
Jerry, just to FYI, we need to keep this relatively short because we have some other items on the agenda that people are waiting
Okay.
for.
All right. I sent a little discussion points to Juliet. Were you able to get that to the rest of the commission?
Yes, I did. I sent that to them today.
Okay. Well, my basic point is on this bridge is that I have gone to the Massachusetts Recreational Trails Conference, and one of the conference room was one of the principles that they have at the trails is that people find a way. And what is with the Marlene Schroeder Nature Trail is that the entrance is about 30 yards down from an access point for crossing the river bridge. And the entrance to Marlene Schroeder Trail is very steep. And I've had several people who are up in years, shall we say, I'm up in years now, who said they can't go down that steep way to get over. Plus, I took the bridge that was there and removed it, but there was rocks there, and several of the commission members mentioned it about it looked like a bridge. So I scattered the rocks, and sure enough, when I come back again after I'm working on the trails, they've rearranged it into a bridge. And to me, that's inviting people to come across. And it's easy because that's the Marlene Schroeder Trail just goes right past and sort of parallel to the stream. And so people are finding a way to get over. And it's very slippery and the bank is steep. And even I have fallen trying to get across the stream. And so I feel a bridge is a much more safe manner because this is city property. And we've had a huge, because of the pandemic, a huge increase in the amount of traffic on the nature trails and on the bike trail. And people are finding a way to get over, a shortcut way over. And so I feel a bridge would be important to get over there. And because the commission was concerned about a central post, this design that I have presented does not have a central post, plus is designed to lay down. In other words, we don't have to prepare the banks or damage the banks. It lays down across so that we can have an effective trail that gets over, and it'll be a lot safer. And I noticed that public safety is part of our Newburyport Conservation Commission ordinance. And so I wanted to appeal to the fact that this would be something very important for safety.
Okay, one thing I want to clarify is the picture that we have up here right now is at the other end of the trail. This is not the little river crossing that we're talking about near the Gloria Brown.
There were
This
two
one is
discussions.
the
There were
other
two
side.
discussions on the Marlene Schroeder Trail. I'm talking about the bridge that's right near the bike trail.
Right, so
And
that
there's-
Oh, okay.
is not this picture.
Okay,
Yeah, that's it. That's the
sorry
right one.
about that. This,
You see it, it's on page 4.
this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, you're talking about, yeah,
This is what you would like to construct
yes,
over what is currently this.
right.
So as I told you in the emails that we had going back and forth, something like this would require a notice of intent because you're working within
Right.
the resource area and the bank and the buffer zone, et cetera. But it's also because you are working within the 25-foot no disturb zone, because you are working within actual wetland resource areas. This would have to be, there would have to be no other alternatives, and the commission would have to issue a variance for this stream crossing. So, and one of the conditions for a variance is that there be no other feasible alternatives, which there is a feasible alternative, and all you have to do is walk a really short distance up the bank a little further, and there's already a dry crossing. So the bridge is really not necessary.
Again,
Yes.
I'm appealing safety and liability concerns for the city.
Well, but like I said, there's another crossing that's already dry. It crosses the existing culvert, which is just up maybe 50 feet at the most from this location. There's a dry crossing across this very stream over an existing culvert. And I walked over it. It's very easy to get up and over there. So I don't believe that this bridge is the only alternative crossing. Again, it's just a short distance. You can even see it from standing right here. You can see where you can cross. So it's up to the commission, but this would require variance. And
Another issue, which is shown in this picture right now, as you can see at the top of the picture, there's a mature tree. And that's where this bridge would need to go, and that tree would have to be removed. Or there would be a tree directly in front of the bridge, which is probably not something, it's not something that I'm gonna agree with. Especially since, as Julie said, leading off to the right near where that pile of wood is, there's another trail that heads over to the roadbed over an adjacent culvert. So this would be a hard sell for me, because I don't really believe it's necessary. And the reality is that folks walking on this trail in general have to have some ability to walk on uneven trails, because most of the trail is like that. There's a lot of roots, there's a lot of everything in this trail and the whole trail system. So I don't see a big need for it. I've done a lot of hiking in the White Mountains and other mountain areas, as has Steve, and you don't have a lot of bridges like this. And
So Jerry, you're welcome to submit a notice of intent for the work. I mean, I indicated that that's the route to go if you'd like to pursue the project. But in looking at it, it's not, it wouldn't meet the criteria for a variance. And so I just wanted to let you know that, so that you don't waste time submitting a notice of
Yeah,
intent.
and NOI
that-
is quite involved, yes.
Yeah, it's quite, exactly. It's quite involved. It takes time and
Yes,
a lot of effort. And I know the project is going to cost some money as well. And there's a lot of labor involved. So I just didn't want to steer you down the road without letting you know that I don't think that it meets the criteria for a variance.
okay, very good.
and we should get back to that where that other bridge is, that needs to come down to. That's I've walked that spot 100 times and have had no issue with walking through there. I think what was done essentially on the bottom of this picture with the stepping stones over the culvert and everything, I think that's spectacular. I'm not sure you can even see it from here, but there it is. And those seem to be more organized now than they were before. And I think that's totally appropriate to do that, because that's over a culvert, the actual stream bed for one of the feeders for the Little River.
And Jerry, again, with this situation, with this bridge,
Mhm.
I didn't mean to imply that a bridge can't be constructed here or that one might not even be appropriate here. It is that this bridge wasn't permitted or approved or reviewed in any way by the
Well-
Conservation Commission, and it wasn't constructed properly. As you can see from this picture, the supports for the bridge are exactly in the middle of the stream. So that wouldn't meet any of the regulations for how to properly do a stream crossing. I'm not sure that the bridge is actually safe the way it's constructed. And so the problem was less about the bridge needing the bridge than it was about the bridge being there without review or permitting, and also the bridge possibly not being safe and definitely not meeting the regulations.
Yeah, I think a bog bridge like the Boy Scouts put down would be an appropriate thing to have here, because the bridge as it is not safe. It bounces one end, when you step on the end of it, it dips down. I think the bridge is more of a safety issue than what was there before.
Well, I can certainly modify it to a bog bridge construction, where we would have two logs on either end, and then there wouldn't be anything in the middle. And that would remedy the situation, because we really do need, it's extremely dangerous, and there is no other way through that. That is a very heavily publicly used trail.
And I disagree with you that it's dangerous. Like Joe, I've hiked out there many, many times and never, ever thought that was dangerous.
Well, I've had several people have slipped on the steep bank there and also had much difficulty getting across the rocks. And so that's what I've received from my emails from people. And they're like, this is a really bad spot. And so it's been, the bridge may be incorrect in its construction, but it's really helped a lot in keeping people from getting damaged or hurt. As you can see, it crosses over an intermittent stream, which is dry during the summer and fall. So,
Right. Which,
and now there's I went to the conference, recreational conference there, and Mass DEP was talking about a 36-inch exemption. And I was wondering if there's any way I can appeal for a 36-inch exemption for this bridge.
I read that, Jerry, that exemption is for work within buffer zone. This is not buffer zone. This is actually within the stream itself. So you place supports within the actual stream. It's not buffer zone.
Ah,
There, you can do unpaved, you know, there are exemptions for unpaved pedestrian pathways through buffer zones. This is not that.
okay.
All right. So this thing as it exists right now has to be removed. Send us, before you build a bog bridge or anything else, you need to send it to us to take a look at. And I think at this point, we're gonna need to cut this off because we have a short but long agenda tonight. So
Okay,
we can always discuss this at a later time, but I'm gonna cut this off right now, unless any of the commissioners have a question. I am not seeing any questions. All right, let's move on to any Plum Island updates.
There are some Plum Island updates, but we might want to save them till the end.
Okay, we can do
We can
that.
do continuation of that at the end.
Okay. Then let's move on to certificates of compliance, etc. We have Carl H. Geiser. Did I see that? Geisler, 4G Street, request for determination of applicability.
Yes, okay, I'm going to promote Mr. Geisler to a panelist. So if you can just hold on. And is anyone else here for that particular project? You could raise your hand and I will also promote you to a panelist representing the project. If not, then, okay. Let's see. Geisler. I believe you should be able to speak, Mr. Geisler, if you'd like to give a brief overview of the proposed project.
And turn on your mic.
Oops. Might want to just try unmuting yourself one more time. There we go.
How's that?
Much
Perfect.
better.
Great. Hi, my name's Carl. I'm owner of 4G Street. The house has been under renovation since 2016. The original permit was for interior changes and new windows, vinyl siding. There was no intent for that permit to do any deck building or exterior landscaping or anything like that. During the renovation, 2017-ish, the front deck, as we were doing the siding and windows, we discovered the front deck that was there, which was 15 by 7, I believe, was unsafe. It wasn't attached to the house properly. It did not have the proper footings. One section was just sitting on top of a cinder block. So I decided to remove it while I had dumpsters there and manpower and stuff like that. So now that I've removed it, I need to put in a new deck up front so that I have a second egress point out of the house on the main level to close out that permit. I've got almost everything done, and this is the last item. So I've proposed building a small deck, 4 foot by 4 foot basically, with steps off to the side where the original steps were to grade. All pressure treated, 2 pylons. There's no bushes in the way because there was a deck there originally. And it's just going to be a simple little deck with railing, and then we can close out the permit and move on with other things.
Here's a photo of the front of the house where you can see the deck was removed. And this is the location where the new landing and stairs would go.
Correct.
So the stairs are just gonna come off and go off to the left there?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So the deck will be 4 foot away from the house, 4 foot wide, And then there'll be 3-foot wide steps going off to the left towards G Street. This is Old Point Road where you're standing and looking at the house right now.
Okay.
So as you can see, there's no vegetation in the area where the previous deck was. It's all sand. It's hard to see because this bush is in the way. But obviously it's less impact than the previous.
Do you have any plan to put any native vegetation in anywhere after you're done with this, or?
I have not. At this point, the front yard has quite a bit of seagrass up front, and I think we've planted maybe 1 or 2. What are those rose bushes called? Beach roses in the back, but we have left the land pretty much untouched as is.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments or?
Nice to have a simple, smaller deck on Plum Island.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think it's a permit requirement for the egress. I want to make the house readily available and proper at this point. We plan on retiring there years from now. And at that point, then we'll look at redoing the decks or making a bigger deck or whatever.
okay. Yeah, when I first saw the 52 by 51, I could only think of it in feet because that's, no one ever does 52 by 51 inch
Yeah.
deck. So,
Yeah. Well, I tried to make those inch marks as visible as possible because I had a feeling someone would be like, wow, that's a big deck.
no. All right, anybody else got anything? Your motion?
Make a motion for a -2 determination.
Second,
All right, Paul Haley,
Yes.
Steve Moore,
Yes.
Dan Warshall,
Yes.
David Vine,
yes.
Ron DeCola,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Geisler.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes. How long will it take to get the complete sign off, or what's the process from here? If I could just take 2 minutes.
Sure. I will put the paperwork for this approval together for you tomorrow, and I'll be able to send it out to you certified mail on Thursday. Do you have a specific address that you want it sent to, or is the address that's on the application the right one? Let's see, the address
Hold on.
on the application is,
The application is 145 Bathrick Road. That should be good.
that's
Yep.
where I'll send it.
All right, great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you,
Very
gentlemen.
good.
Everybody else, thank
you.
you. Have a good night.
You too. All right. With that, can I get a motion to open the public hearings?
Moved.
Moved.
We have a second.
Second.
All right, Paul Ely,
Yes.
Steve Moore,
Yes.
Dan Warshall,
Yes.
David Vine,
Yes,
Ron DeCola,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And I'm going to turn it over to Council President Igerman for this portion.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me turn my camera on. Well, it'll work or not. So first, we'll take roll call. I'll do the roll. I don't think Clerk Jones is with us. So this is a special meeting of the City Council. Councilor Connell. Absent. Councilor Tantar.
Yeah.
Here. Councilor Vogel.
Present.
Councilor Devlin. Absent. Councilor Zede.
Here.
Here. Counselor Khan,
Present.
Counselor Shan,
Present.
Counselor McCauley. He is absent. No, he's here. I just can't hear him. No, he may turn up. Counselor Wallace,
Here.
Counselor Lane.
Here.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so thank you very much for letting us meet jointly with you. The purpose of the joint meeting is so that we can deliberate together. Obviously, there's no agenda item for voting. So the purpose, though, is that we can talk in real time because we're all in the same Zoom room at the same time. Councillor Wallace had a set of questions that she sent staff, and staff sent written answers. But before we go to that, I wanted the commission to know where the council is on what we think we know. And remember, of course, we're not experts in the Waterfront Protection Act or your wetlands ordinance. I'm sorry, Wetlands Protection Act or the city's wetlands ordinance or the city's wetlands regulations. So again, I'm just going to summarize what we think we know. First, jurisdiction. So we understand that under your regulations, you have jurisdiction not just over wetlands, in this case bordering vegetated wetlands, but also a 100-foot buffer. So if I could share my screen, I'll show people what a buffer looks like. Let's see. So here's 57 Low Street. There are a whole bunch of concentric lines that people can see, but it's the outermost dashed line, the one that actually goes through the existing building and then curves in a big arc. That is the 100 feet from the wetland. We'll get back to delineation in a minute. So in other words, the site, I think it's 2.17 acres, but the portion that's subject to jurisdiction is not all 2.17. I mean, eyeballing, it looks like it's about 80% of the site, not 100%, but something like 80. Then we'll get into the other concentric lines in a minute. I'll get back to that. So we know that. We also know that Andy Port commissioned a delineation, or at least a partial delineation, that's dated June 2019. And that is shown, you know, that's where these lines come from. Okay, that's where these lines come from. That delineation hadn't ever come to the commission before, but it's informed the city council to date. We also know from Councillor Wallace's questions that there is some sort of an RDA, which I'm showing now, that was done by the commission a long time ago in 1997. So this is a little different, looks a little different because it doesn't distinguish between the parcel that the city is considering purchasing, which is the top part, and the rest of the National Guard land. But they seem to have been focused instead on, at the time, piles of material and what they label as a drainage swale. But drainage swale is a term of art, so we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it a ditch or depression. Okay, so back to, where is it? This drawing. So the outermost line, you'll see if you zoom in a little bit, it'll show 100-foot distance. So here it is, 100-foot buffer. So to explain to the council, under the city's wetlands regulations, buffer zones don't mean that you can't do anything there. That's not what it means. It means that it's jurisdictional for the commission and they have to know what you're doing. Buffer zones are, quote, significant to the values and interests. So the concern, the reason why buffer zones exist is because if you do things in certain activities in the buffer zone, it could affect the wetland. And we can get into that later. There's also a presumption, I think it's section 8A3 that I found, that the applicant has to show that if what they're doing in the buffer zone by clear and convincing evidence is not going to harm the resource. That's the purpose of the thing. Finally, there's a total disturbance rule. That's 8A4C, which provides that the total disturbance of the buffer zone, so again, everything within 100 feet, we're not even talking about the wetland yet, cannot exceed 20%. So for example, if the buffer zone is 100 square feet, that means you can only disturb 20 square feet. Obviously, those numbers are going to be bigger here. Next, we get to the sort of outer 50 feet. So you see 50-foot outer buffer. I think I'm highlighting it here, my cursor. There is a special rule to handle that in Newburyport under the regulations, where if they're minor activities, you don't have to go all the way to this commission. They don't have to have a hearing. There's a letter permit, so-called, that staff can approve. So again, staff is verifying. It's not that you just go ahead and do it. You still have to check with staff. And they, in this case, Julia Goffredson reviews it, confirms that it's a minor activity that's not going to be harmful. She can approve that by mere letter. Then we go into the 25-foot no disturbance area. So it just so happens in this drawing, to differentiate, it's the heavy dashed line. That is the no disturbance area. And 25 feet in from that, you see 25-foot buffer is where the actual wetland is that was delineated in June. So what happens in the no disturbance zone? Well, strangely enough, disturbance of any kind is prohibited. And this is because the 25 feet is considered the most likely, where if there's alteration, because it's immediately adjacent to the wetland, it's likely, that's what the regulation says, to result in altering the wetland itself. So there are strict controls in Newburyport on what you can do in that area. Then we've had talk about variances. So the city's wetland regulations, section 9A, does have a variance provision. And in their discretion, the commission, not staff, but the commission can grant variances from specific requirements of the ordinance and the regs after a hearing, and have to make findings. So they could, theoretically, they have the power to waive any of these rules. There are limitations. They're supposed to make certain standards they have to meet to do it. It's not unfettered discretion. And we can get into that later, but that's written into the regulation of what they have to look at in order to even give such a variance. And mitigation measures have to be done. When it comes to an actual alteration of wetland, so that would be this area here. We've had talk at the council about so-called replication, and we'll need staff to clarify that, and the commission too, but our understanding is it is possible to get a variance in order to actually alter or fill wetlands, but part of the mitigation is likely to be replication, which is disfavored expressly under the local regulations. It says why replication is not ideal. And then there's valid grounds for the commission to deny a variance where the cumulative alteration, as I understand it, is 5,000 square feet. It doesn't say that they can't give the variance. It just says it's a ground for them to deny it. And then finally, I don't have it, but staff does. One of the things that was brought to light was there's a gravel area. You'll see here, gravel. And there's a little bit of weirdness there. So if Andy has that image that Councilor Wallace sent in today, you can put it up. It looks like the gravel area was put in sometime between 2016 and 2018. We have an aerial photo. I'll do stop share. We have an aerial photo because, Google always takes aerial photos. So we know it went in at that time, but we couldn't find any evidence that anyone ever went to the commission for permission. So clearly it was either Now, today, it's in the so-called 25 no disturbance zone. So it wouldn't be allowed. We don't know what it was when it was put in between 2016 and 2018. It might have been wetland. The boundary of the wetland, you'll see, is right on the edge of it. So who knows? And then, that pretty much catches everyone up on what the council has heard to date. Let's see. Andy, do you have the image of 2016 versus 2018, just because people can see the gravel? No? Yeah, there you go. Right, so that's what we're talking about, is this little area to the southeast edge. So the wetlands have already, or at least the buffer zone, there's already been some alterations which will count against some percentage. And I assume a permit will be sought after the fact, but I don't know that. So I'm going to go back just so while we're discussing and show this drawing, because it shows all of the various buffer zones, and I'll zoom out. And with that, maybe we should go to Councilor Wallace's letter and go through her questions and answers. Maybe that would be, but before we do that, do any of the commissioners have any questions of us before we plow ahead? I guess just, sorry, we're kind of barbarians on the city council, so you have to raise your hand to be recognized. I don't see anyone raising their hand. Okay. Why don't, Andy, you take us through Councilor Wallace's letter? How about that?
Sure. Councilors, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Just want to make sure. So there was a memo that came into the council, and Councilor Wallace had submitted this. I'm happy to, just to explain a little briefly what's going on in each of those bullets. And then if you have any other questions, defer to, either answer the questions or defer to others who might be appropriate to respond. So the first one I'm going to skip over, if that's all right with the council, I think, because it will be discussed Thursday evening, and that's the licensed site professional analysis of the site.
Yeah, we're just here for wetlands. Yep.
Right. So number 2 is certification of the wetland boundary and the resource areas on and around the site by the Conservation Commission in accordance with the Wetlands Protection Act. I interpreted that to mean actual filing with the Conservation Commission. And so in the communication that I sent out to members of the council, I just clarified that I think we can achieve a similar outcome without the formal filing, that the state is not, as current owners of the property, interested in participating in. They don't want to get involved in any permitting aspects on the property of what the city might be doing. So there's that aspect. But the plan that was developed back in 2019, June 27th, I believe, of 2019, was commissioned at the city's request in order to determine how much wetlands were on the property. So that was determined by Wetland Scientist. He's here this evening if there's any questions for him about the delineation on that plan. And then the actual certification process, and I'll defer to Julia and Joe and the commission members if they want to speak to that in more detail, but we were not anticipating an actual filing with the Conservation Commission prior to purchasing the property from the state, because we felt that we had, this is from the office's perspective, did not have too much of an issue with the delineation that was done. It seemed pretty clear that there was a comprehensive assessment of where the wetlands are, that they're pretty extensive towards the rear of the property to be acquired. And so we didn't feel it was necessary to do the filing before the commission either. So I did have an informal discussion with the commission, and the certification process would actually be the commission receiving a notice of resource area delineation, essentially, and reviewing that plan, essentially having a city commissioned wetland scientist go out there and verify that that plan is accurate, that the fields that flags that have been placed in the field are accurate. And those flags are shown obviously on the plans that you've all seen. However, that process, any questions about that, I will defer obviously to join the commission on, but the question there was whether or not the city could get certification of that I presume from this memo prior to the acquisition. I don't feel that that's necessary. I'll defer to the commission and the commission's agent on that, but I don't feel that's necessary to resolve some indication of the order of magnitude of wetlands on the property or any considerations we might want to keep in mind. Councilor Eidman was pointing out the resource area and the buffer zones. And so I think that with the city's own officials, we can have a pretty good assessment of what the possibilities are on the site without the formal filing. But on that, I'll defer to councilors and the
right.
commission members.
Well, Councilor Shand has her hand up. Go ahead, Councilor Shand.
Thank you, Council President. Can you actually post, you're showing the one that was in order 214. Can you actually post the site plan that was created by Meridian Land Services?
Yeah, it's a little harder to read, but let me find it. You go ahead. I'll dig it up.
And I just want to make sure we were looking at that one too while we were having this conversation. Thank you.
Sure. God damn it, where is it? I had it. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so there are the concentric lines again. Let me get back to the participant thing.
Can you make it just a little bit bigger, please? Thank you.
Make it a little bigger.
Councilors, I'm happy to walk through if you have any questions about what the plan is showing, or I'm sure Julia can speak to that as well. But you can see.
Councilor Z does his hand up. Go ahead, Councilor Z.
Thank you. I'll try and stick with the topics at hand. So the topic at hand right now seems to be the delineation itself. So I'm not an expert on this. So what I want to ask is, I guess I don't understand how a line can be jagged like this. Maybe that's because I don't understand how this works, but if somebody could give me some color on that, that would be helpful. When we did a site visit, we stood towards the rear of the property and to the naked eye, which is obviously the point, it's hard to discern the difference standing, say, in some of these little crevices, I don't know what else to call them, but where the sort of the line goes in, then it comes back out and so forth. I didn't know if somebody could speak to that as to what are, how do you figure out what is a wetland and what accounts for these kind of jagged lines?
Well, first, Joe Teixeira, you had your hand up.
Yeah, this is pretty much standard for us. A lot of it, there are various ways. I'm not an expert in wetland delineation, but minor topography would change it. Like a stream bed, you would see it moving all around, like the bottom wetland area on this, and a lot of them that we've gotten in, the wetland scientists are looking at the soils to see whether it has the hallmarks of a wetland. I can't remember the exact terminology. Julie can probably flesh that out a little more.
Well, before we get to that, don't we have the wetland scientist, you said, Andy?
We do, actually, and I was going to suggest that. Thank you, Councilor. So Tyler Ferrick is on our list this evening. He is able to speak to the delineation that he created. I know just from my background with wetlands that typically you're looking at the type of vegetation as well as the type of soils. So those may have played factors, but I'll defer to Tyler if you could unmute yourself and just speak to how the delineation was done here.
Yeah, and then a couple of notes. Again, sorry to be so formal, but Councilor Connell has joined us. He is on the line. And next, after Tyler speaks, will be Christine Wallace and Afroz Khan. Go ahead, Tyler.
Again, Tyler Ferrick with DeRosa Environmental. We flagged this back in May of 2019. So on the site, you can kind of see there was historically a lot of earth disturbance. So the topography varied in that back area. So the micro topography played kind of a big factor in what was wetland and what wasn't. So that's kind of why you see a lot of jagged lines. Pretty much a lot of the hydrology comes off from the pavement and it dips down. That's kind of where it goes up to a wetland finger by wetland A22 and slowly starts to drain down. But there was a lot of areas out in that field area that was a sandy gravel. Just tonight I saw the old plans of they removed fill piles, so that could play effect where the wetland line fell. But it is all based on soils and vegetation. So in areas that were historically excavated, fill put over, that's when it would come down to soils to determine whether it's wetland or not.
Could I just ask one quick follow-up, please?
Yeah, just follow up.
Just one last question. So this was done in May of 2019. Is this plan still considered usable and valid? Is there a timeline on which these operate for those of us who don't understand how it works?
For the delineation, it's 3 years.
3
So
years,
it
got
would be
it.
still valid.
Got it. Thank you very much. I yield. Thank you.
Councillor Wallace.
Hi, thank you, Council President, and thanks to the Conservation Commission for having us. I thought this was probably the appropriate forum to kind of go into some of these details because we, a couple of weeks ago, we had the city council kind of arguing about wetlands. I thought, this is really what the Conservation Commission should be doing. So we kind of veered away from my memo here, which is fine. I just kind of want to bring it back a little bit. I know Andy Port was talking about a few items, but I think we can come back to the memo because I think some of these may get kind of discussed as we go. But I think what would be really helpful right now, and as the wetland scientist, excuse me, started, is just talking about the physical characteristics of the site. Because once you have kind of your wetlands figured out, and that can be a process, especially on a site like this, that is very flat, it's disturbed, and it has very high groundwater. It's a low-lying area. So in my experience, you might have a wetland scientist for a developer saying one thing, and then you might have a wetland scientist for a municipality saying another thing. You have to kind of work it out, and that's where the Conservation Commission makes the decisions. But I do think it would be good just to talk about the drainage that's out there, the hydrology of the site, not necessarily if things are jurisdictional or not, we'll get to that. But I think, I don't know if DPS is here, they may have some insight based on their recent field visits and their records. I think that would be very helpful. And then after that, kind of talk about the regulatory component. So, and just for any of you who aren't familiar, my background, I'm a civil engineer. I still have an active PE stamp. I spent many years with different consulting firms doing stormwater design, roadway design, and a lot of development reviews on behalf of Conservation Commissions, ZBAs, planning boards, etc. And I actually was on the Arlington Conservation Commission many years ago. And I also at one point was a soil evaluator. I haven't renewed that license. But so anyway, so when I came into this project and started researching it, I couldn't help but put on kind of my engineer peer review hat. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I think having these discussions in public is very useful. And I will be curious to listen to all perspectives and, we can go from there.
All right, well, before we go back to Mr. Ferrick, because we have the benefit of having it and he can talk about what he saw. And I don't want to forget the ditch, or whatever it is that was identified in 97, because that's not shown. Let me call on Councillor Khan, who was waiting. Councillor Khan.
Council President, I could defer to the expert, the wetland scientist, to answer Councillor Wallace's questions.
Okay.
If you could just keep me in the queue after. Thank you.
I will, and then after you will be Councillor Vogel. So Mr. Ferrick, can you sort of answer the question about what you saw and characterize the site generally?
Yes, so in the back, relatively there is a high groundwater table at the site. You see that through various areas, but there are different drainage swales. One would be, on the plan, I can't get a direction, but going from wetland flag A24 to A28. It's not depicted on the plan, but there is a swale that runs there to help divert the water towards the back
Yeah,
of the property.
that's the southeasterly lot line. Yep.
And then on the front of the parcel where you drive in, there is an intermittent stream that flows into a culvert. And then it goes underground, assuming it appears it goes a few properties down to other bordering vegetative wetlands. And the intermittent stream does come upgrading on the road. And there is also vegetative wetlands up that way in other properties. So you can just see a little portion of that in the corner.
Well, help us out here. So the intermittent stream, which is on near Low Street, is that shown in as, I mean, those don't have flags, right?
Those do. There's a C, wetland flag C1 start, and then it goes to the C3 end, which is the start of the culvert.
Okay.
And then the other side of the intermittent stream is marked with wetland flag D1 to D3.
Got it. I see now. I see. And what about, again, what about this 1997 thing, which was on the northwesterly lot line?
Is that plan, can pop up that plan real quick?
Yeah, sure. I'll pop it up. Can you see it?
Right, so that would be, yeah, we did not see a swale running in back of that. The wetlands tailored off towards that neighboring property, but it looped around back away.
Yeah.
If we saw anything going back towards the property, we would have flagged it for to pick up that buffer zone.
Okay, so in other words, you did look at the whole shooting match, but you didn't. This was
Right.
not flagged. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Keep going.
Councilor, this is Andy Port. There's another graphic that would be helpful at this point. City engineer John Eric White had put together a sketch of the drainage out there by the street. And this, I think, ties into the question that was asked about what's going on near the street side.
Yeah. What can you put that up?
So he's put a couple of captions on this. But what he's basically indicated in here on this graphic is that there's a swale along the roadway there. He says there's not a swale there along that line there today. He says the ground does slope away from the roadway down in that direction. He shows with the pinkish lines that you see there between the stormwater catch basins, he shows the lines there and heading eastbound on Low Street from that location up at the corner that was discussed where the head wall is labeled.
Okay. So I guess before we get off this, because these aren't wetlands that we were focused on at the council before when we met in December. So, and we heard from Mr. Ferrick that he did flag the ones at the extreme northerly corner. He gave us the flag numbers. Does that mean there are buffers around these too? Maybe Julia would be the right person.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I can't raise my hand, FYI, because I'm the meeting host. So
Oh,
for some
okay,
reason,
yeah.
Zoom isn't letting me do that. You'll have
No
to
problem.
just ask me questions.
Okay.
So yeah, Counselor Eigenman, your question is, are there buffer zones around which areas?
Well, maybe we go back to the flags. You know, again, Mr. Ferrick said maybe not everything that John Eric identified, but he has some wetland flags that he put into an intermittent stream at the northerly edge.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So if that's wetland, does that not mean that there are buffers around it within 100 feet?
Well, it depends on
I
how
think that
that's,
comes down to whether or not the wetland vegetation that was detected there has something to do with a man-made drainage conveyance versus is it a resource area?
Well, right. I mean, a lot of times there's plenty of wetland vegetation in man-made drainage swales, and a roadside swale like this, John Eric went out and looked at it. It flows through a culvert. The roadside swales are typically not reviewed as jurisdictional wetlands these days. They used to be, and years ago, the Department of Environmental Conservation, Department of Environmental Protection recommended that conservation commissions do not consider drainage swales, man-made drainage swales, roadside swales of this sort to be jurisdictional areas because they need to be cleaned out. They need to be maintained. They have a purpose for carrying stormwater that needs to be continued. And if you start regulating these things as wetlands, then you can't go in there and clean them out. You can't help them continue to carry stormwater alongside a roadway and through culverts and that kind of thing. So in this particular case, we would not regulate this drainage swale as a jurisdictional wetland, even though it might have wetland vegetation in it. John Eric went out there and looked at it. He also classified it as a drainage swale. He calls it country drainage, which is essentially just a roadside swale, and it goes through a culvert that you can see here.
And it does it matter when you said that they used to regulate it. So does it matter when the drainage swale dates from?
I'd have to go back and look at the date that DEP came out with that policy guidance. It is policy guidance. It's not in the regs. But they said that, and again, I apologize, I don't have this on the tip of my fingers. I would guess it was over 10 years ago that they recommended to conservation commissions that man-made drainage swales not be regulated as jurisdictional wetland areas. And that's been the practice in Newburyport throughout the industrial park, especially. These property owners need to maintain those drainage structures, those drainage features, the swales and detention basins, etc. And if they are regulated as wetlands and we won't let them go in there and remove that accumulated vegetation and sediment, then you end up with a clogged system and the things start to flood and culverts get clogged. And so it's really important to allow these man-made drainage swales and other stormwater features to be treated as such and not as jurisdictional wetlands.
Got it. And before we go back to Mr. Ferrick, we were talking about John Eric's graphic here. So we maintain this particular country swale that John Eric calls. Is it part of Low Street? What is it? Or is it the Army?
I'd have to, yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look and see if it's on city roadway property right away or whether it's on a private property.
Yeah, I believe that's in the actual right of way. I'm trying to pull up a plan that John Eric had sent me, but I believe it's in the right of way.
That's fine. I'm just curious. All right, let's go back to, sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead. I think you were, anything else that we wanted to talk, because we don't have John Eric, unfortunately, but Andy, was there anything else you wanted to say about this diagram before we go back to Mr. Ferrick?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ferrick, was there anything else that you wanted to, I was trying to figure out what these swales were. I mean, we did. So why don't you go ahead if there's more?
No, I mean, the only thing I'd add that swale in the red, we didn't see that out there. But the swale marked in the blue, I mean, it does carry a lot of water. You can see it flowing today. So, it would be deemed an intermittent stream according to the Wetlands Protection Act. And so that's why we flagged it as such. As it is important to maintain that flow drainage. And that's one of the concerns of Mass DEP. Doesn't mean you can't do anything around it, but it is important to keep that flow because that is hydrology going to adjacent wetlands as well.
Okay.
Counselor, this is Andy. I was able to pull up that plan and it does actually show some information that's relevant.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this particular plan, the city engineer pulled up is from 1970. And what you'll see on this plan, this is actually oriented the opposite direction, and I apologize for that. But this, if you look at this, what you're seeing here, the brick building that's shown in there, that's the 57 Low Street. You can kind of notice the angle of the property there, similar. So that is the building and the site that we're talking about. But as you can see, just before that, consistent with the other illustration, was a head wall that's right out in front of that building on the street there. That's the sort of thin rectangular box.
Yeah.
And they show a sort of a drainage ditch along the side of the roadway with topographic lines, and there's an arrow between the sort of a swale that they've drawn. So this was recognized as part of that drainage conveyance between outlets further up the road near the intersection with Hale Street, all the way down to this head wall in front of the building where it continued down the street eastward back in 1970, it looks like.
Okay, well, that makes sense because 1970 is when Knockmullen opened. So that's probably when they did all of this work. That makes sense. I'm a little confused by the intermittent stream thing, but we'll move on.
Could I just add one thing? Sorry, Councilor Eigenman, on the intermittent stream thing. I agree with Tyler that if there's water flowing in there consistently like that and it's classified as an intermittent stream on USGS, then even if there is a buffer zone around that, that's something like he said, the point is to allow that to continue to carry water. So whether it's an intermittent stream or a roadside swale, or however you want to classify it, with a buffer zone or without a buffer zone, the point is that it needs to be maintained. Water needs to continue to flow through there, continue to flow through the culvert and towards the wetlands where it eventually gets to. That's all.
Got it. All right, that's crystal. All right, well, Councilor Khan's been very patient. Councilor Khan, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Council President. So, you know, I want to thank having the Conservation Commission here before us because we want to really tap into your expertise here since we don't do this every day like you guys do. So we have before us this the wetlands delineation that we just heard about that's been kind of done by a licensed wetland scientist, and they've walked through and looked at the topography and put together this map. And the question I had is in terms of Concom's kind of role in all of this. You know, we talked a little bit about the notice of intent. I heard that mentioned. You know, when we look at like the man-made swales, for example, for drainage, and it was helpful to hear the explanation of why that would not be kind of classified as wetlands. I was curious in terms of the permitting process, or if any project is done on this site, where do you step in terms of any stormwater management? Because that seems to be a key aspect in terms of why you probably wouldn't want them designated as wetlands. And I was just curious in terms of your process, if a project is discussed here, how does that work with this commission that we're talking to today?
Julia, why don't you go ahead, and then if your commissioners want to add something, if they could raise their hand, I'll call on them.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Councilor Khan, so your question was, how would we handle stormwater management on a site like this if there was a permit application?
Correct.
Okay, so any permit any notice of intent that would come before the commission for a project on this large of a site, if it wasn't a single family home project, would have to come along with a stormwater management plan that would have to show how the project would meet the state stormwater management standards, the 9 standards. And even on a redevelopment site like this, where the site is already developed, the applicant would have to show how stormwater management was at a minimum being improved across the site, wherever possible. So that means no increase in the rate of runoff from the site, no decrease in infiltration capacity from the site, and that sort of thing, no sedimentation or erosion impacts in water leaving the site. So stormwater needs to be handled and managed. And on a site that was developed a long time ago like this, with minimal stormwater management features, you'd guess that they would be making improvements to stormwater management on the site. So any notice of intent and any permit issued by the commission would have to include all of that.
May I just follow up on that?
Please do.
And that's standard practice, right? So that's part of the effort, because, you know, we've been talking about wetlands and the delineation and getting that kind of done correctly and verified. But the stormwater aspect is something, and Newburyport has our own stormwater ordinance too, that gets triggered through this whole process, is correct?
Yep. Yes, and John Eric White in the Department of Public Services is responsible for managing the permits through the city's stormwater ordinance. So let's say there's a project that doesn't have any relationship to wetlands, it's further than 100 feet from any resource area or wetland. then it wouldn't come before us for stormwater management. It would strictly go to John Eric for a stormwater permit. But in situations like this, where you have wetlands on site as well, then we would look at the stormwater management plan and sign off on it through the order of conditions. John Eric would also be looking at the stormwater management plan and issue a permit through the city's ordinance. So it gets almost like looked at double. And oftentimes we would even, if it was a really large site, we would have it peer reviewed as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vogel is next. And,
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all who are here in front of us. I greatly appreciate it. I just heard from Councillor Wallace about her experience of having potentially opposing views on what is wetlands or what aren't wetlands. And I think it was framed, you might have a developer and then you might have a property owner or whatever it might be and have opposing views. How does the commission manage such conflict like that? Is it again a peer review? How does that get resolved? I might be a little bit off topic, but I'm just curious about that. Maybe Julia?
Would you like me to answer? Sure. So again, just to clarify what the question is, you asking that if a developer were to come forward with a proposed project and there were wetlands involved and they presented a delineation, let's say something like this, and we disagreed with it, how does that get handled?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, or maybe even someone from the public or a neighbor or a butter comes and they disagree with it. Well, we would do a site visit and we would go out and we would look at the delineation. We would look at all the wetlands flags and see whether or not we agreed with the fact that it was delineated properly. And the three factors that go into delineation are vegetation, soils, and hydrology. You have to have all three to mark that as a wetland or not a wetland. And so if we didn't feel like we had the expertise to make a call on whether or not a flag should be in a certain place, and we felt like it would have an impact on the project, then we might ask for a peer review. And we've done that in several times in the past, especially on larger projects. So the peer review usually settles it.
Thank you.
But before I go to Councillor Wallace, I wonder, if, Julia, if you could make me a host because I can just lower people's hands, because Councillor Khan still, I can't lower her hand. Or you can lower her hand. I could ask you. So yeah, there we go. All right, thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Yes, thank you. So I have a few specific questions, or, we did a site visit a few weeks ago and there are a couple of things that I saw out there. We're also just looking at, aerials or topo, etc. So my concern is there's actually more wetlands out there than what has been shown to us. So I'll just kind of mention them here. One being any wetlands that are on the neighbor's property. I realize you can't always get access or whatnot, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're supposed to show wetlands within 100 feet of your site. So that would have to be shown, because then that would affect where the buffer is. So when we talk about the long swale that's there, yeah, it may not be exactly all the way down the line like it was, but it is wet back there somewhere, because the topography goes from the street down to the vegetated wetland that's behind the site we're looking at here. So that's my first question, is what about wetlands on the neighbor site? Two, that we also saw out there, and this was also part of the 1997 RDA, was that swale, and there was water in it, and there was vegetation, and that is not shown on the plan that we have seen so far. And so that's another question I have. And then third, about the swale in the road and ditches. In my experience, again, I had a lot of roadway experience. We flagged, and I worked with the Wetland Scientist. We flagged anything that was wet next to the road. And this was a while ago. But from what I understand, DEP came out with new regulations. I actually have it here in front of me to kind of help clarify when stormwater management features, whether it be a detention basin or a swale, that kind of thing, is actually regulated under the policy. So I won't read it all, but it's 310 CMR 10.02. And it says stormwater management systems designed, constructed, installed, operated, maintained, and improved as designed with the stormwater management systems. Excuse me. Do not by themselves constitute areas subject to protection, provided that the system was constructed, installed, or improved after November 18th, 1996. And that's when the stormwater management regulations went into place. So from what I understand, it's you know, once you build a stormwater feature, you want to be able to dedicate it as a stormwater feature. But what they're saying here in this provision is that it had to be done after 1996 and done in accordance with the correct details, design standards, etc. So I think that's where they kind of drew the line. As far as a roadway ditch, this one, the fact that it's running and that it's called an intermittent stream, you know, it is pretty low. So I'm wondering if part of it is fed by groundwater, because it also hasn't rained in quite a while. So, you know, whether it's bordering vegetated wetland or not, I don't know. But again, in my experience, I've seen where, you know, an intermittent stream might be called bank, or have land underwater. And so it's still have a buffer zone. But I guess my question is it a swale or is it a stream? And then is it a perennial stream if it's flowing right now? So that's just my question, excuse me, in terms of, are there more wetlands out here than are shown? And I just ask this because when we go into this decision as a city council, we want to make sure we have all the information. We don't want any surprises, whether it's cost or legal appeals to the wetland line. Just trying to get all the facts before we have to make a very tough decision. Thanks.
Well, let's turn to, we've got the benefit of having Mr. Ferrick. So I heard two parts to your question. The first was he was able to do some delineation on the parcel that's being retained by DCAM, but there isn't anything where the private home is. That's the first question, is what he thinks about that. And then the other is the intermittent stream and this 1996 date. So Mr. Ferrick, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yep, I'll start off with the neighboring parcel. We pretty much with a wetland flag A1 start, we showed that's where it cuts back towards the house. So there was no wetlands that kept going back towards the one-story brick building. So that wetland flag A1 without going on completely on the neighboring property would be the closest point, which would reflect the furthest 100-foot buffer zone from this particular wetland on the site. In regards to the intermittent stream, it does not show up on the USGS website as being perennial. And especially as a small stream like this, it would just, it's typical to be an intermittent stream, not perennial. Clearly looking at the depth of the swale, historically, it's definitely probably been dug and improved to fit culverts in, because it's definitely not natural. But there is, of course, there is water in the stream. There is soils there. And during the growing season, there is different sedges, rushes that grow along that stream, and some silky dogwood we saw out there as well. So when we flagged that, we were including that vegetation in that delineation along that intermittent stream.
What about the 1996 thing? What does that mean? Nothing? Is that not relevant?
No, I heard that. It is relevant, but in this circumstance, that's why we flagged it as wetland, as it is jurisdictional. So I would agree with that 1996.
Okay.
Counselor, may I quickly follow up?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that was the little piece that behind the trailer. So there's actually, you know, kind of two swales there. There's the one along the road, and then there's that other one. I think it's all connected, but it starts to go perpendicular to that other one. And that didn't show up on the plans. So I'm not sure if it goes all the way back along the property like the 1997 RDA shows, but there was definitely something up kind of behind the trailer there.
Right, I see that in that plan. In reviewing the wetlands out there, we didn't see a swale or consider it a connection. And we walked all throughout there.
Counselor Wallace.
Unless there was something new, but from our review, we did not see a jurisdictional swale in that area in particular.
Counselor Wallace, I would just speculate that what might have happened is that there was historically a swale there, because as we can see, their water is flowing along the roadside in an intermittent stream probably at some level. And it could be that in the past, that water then turned and flowed back along the property line back towards the wetlands, which are down gradient behind the site. And then later the culvert was created, and now they've directed the flow through the culvert and along the roadway and stopped the flow back towards the rear of the site. It just could be, I mean, I'm just throwing that as a hypothetical of why we would see it on this 1997 plan, but not be seeing enough evidence of it out there now.
No, I mean, that makes sense, but we actually saw it. I have pictures of it. It was wet, and there were like a lot of birds and there were bunnies hopping around. I mean, that's, you know, anecdotal, but I was actually surprised to see the water there. And it may not be connected all the way back, but there was a wet spot there, just for the record.
Yeah. Before I go to the next counselor, Joe Teixeira has his hand up, which is incredibly exciting because he's not a counselor and we wanted some commissioners too. So Joe, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, with regards to, you know, calling the swale, or, you know, calling it a perennial stream or intermittent stream and all that, the commission needs to be pretty consistent about how we classify drainage structures like that. And if we did a lot of gnashing and thrashing over the years about the industrial park, and it's all the same sort of drainage systems which were built before 1996, and we would need to be consistent in how we're treating those. If we're gonna, you know, do this sort of classification. So the industrial park, a lot of the drainage swales in the industrial park have water in them most of the time. Some of those, the basins always have water in them. So we got to be consistent.
Got it. Thank you. Councillor Zede is next.
So just following on the same conversation. So the classification aside, which is over my head and above my pay grade, what are the practical implications for the usability of the land around that? Not from a strictly practical perspective. So as Julia mentioned, the point here is you want the water to flow. There's a question about how you classify it, which I assume would have an impact on buffers and so forth. But just from a practical standpoint, what does that mean? Does anybody know the answer, or somebody who does this on a regular basis? How much practically do you need to leave around something like that so that it can continue to do its function? Maybe more practically, because in this case, it's not a private developer considering this, it's the city and the city. So, we sort of have to be on both sides of this and understand what are the practical implications of it. And then, obviously I'm not diminishing the debate about the regulatory side about what is this thing from a sort of a more legal perspective. I just want to understand the practicalities. I don't know if Tyler speaks to that, or who could, or Julia or somebody could speak to that kind of So what does it mean? So forget
Or-
about the legal
Or a
aspect.
commissioner,
Or
or
a
a commissioner.
Or yeah,
Yes.
or definitely a commissioner, please. Sorry. Yep, agreed. Thank you.
Then I'll
I'm
speak.
happy to speak if you want.
Yeah, please, go ahead. Dead air is painful.
So with an intermittent stream, especially in this case, it's mainly functions as drainage for, you know, storm water, surface water. Doesn't mean you can't do anything within that 100-foot buffer. I'm gonna lean on Julia for the restricted buffers for the town, but usually in our experience with this sort of wetland, we'll call it, you know, historically has been improved. And, you know, we're talking this stream is 3 to 4 feet wide with vegetation. So this would be more of a wetland that you could do more activities closer to. Unlike the wetlands in the back are more pristine, there's vegetation, it's more wildlife habitat, unlike the front portion. And I can't remember the Newburyport's restricted buffers, but I'll let Julia chime in on that.
Thanks. Thanks, Tyler. I would agree with that. This were classified as an intermittent stream with wetland vegetation, there would be another 100-foot buffer zone around it. There would be another 25-foot no disturb zone around it, just as we have back in the wetlands towards the rear of the site. But like you said, this is already a fairly well disturbed and previously developed site. This intermittent stream, if we want to call it that, for now, is also functioning as a roadside swale, a roadside ditch, receiving drainage from the roadway and from up further north there. So we would just, again, the commission would review any project that came before it to make sure that stormwater was being managed properly. And they would have to look at what's taking place within the buffer zone around that stream. They would have to make sure that if there were additional impacts in the area within that buffer zone, that those were being mitigated. If there was disturbance within a 25-foot no disturb zone here, just as at the rear of the site, they would need to take a look at whether or not there were any exemptions that would allow that disturbance or whether or not that would require variance. But again, like Tyler said, this is a disturbed area. It's not something that I think we would get to, commission would get to nervous about work within that zone. They want to make sure there were no impacts to the stream, but aside from that.
Thank you. Councillor Zede, are you set?
Yeah, I will yield for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Connell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to ask a couple of, well, two questions. One for the general public, and I know the answer to, but I'd like to hear it from our conservation commissioners, and then another one which is more global about the utility of this and the advisability of the city acquiring this land. The first question is, if the city were to acquire this, would we be required to meet all of the regulations that fall under your jurisdiction, similar to a private developer who purchased the land and suggested a use to you?
Joe, go ahead.
Yes, the city would have to abide by all the regulations. And of course, with variances, there's overwhelming public benefit. And clearly in certain cases, you know, or in this case, there could be an argument for public benefit for any incursion into the 25-foot. But you know, this would not be the first time that we've done it. And it's pretty much, in my experience, been exclusively with private interests that have done good things for the city as a result of the incursions.
Good, thanks, Joe. My next question is more global, and I'd like, from the perspective of our wetland scientist, Tyler, and then so a kind of wetlands or a technical perspective, and then a regulatory perspective, perhaps from Julia or members of the commission. Are there any characteristics of this site that, in your view, first to Tyler, you would be very cautious about in terms of the city acquiring this property and potentially putting it to some public use? And then the next part of that question is from a regulatory standpoint, and maybe it's Andy, I don't know, someone's going to pick it up. I asked the same question. Is there a downside? Is there something we're unable to see at this point that you would have concerns about? Because we'd like to know about it in advance of a possible acquisition.
Well, Councilor Connell, if I could just, as Andy Port, if I could just briefly speak on my behalf, from the Office of Planning and Development's perspective, we see no reason, either from a wetlands perspective or from a soils cleanup issue, which will be discussed on Thursday, have no reasons for thinking the city should not proceed with buying or acquiring the property. Obviously, there's discussion to be had about the future uses of it, but given that the city does have needs from several different departments for needs, and the property valuation is good in the city's favor, the wetlands are not a constraint, in my opinion, that would justify backing out of the presumed closure to purchase this property, because there is a substantial amount of space up front that could, in its present form, be used or be reused in the future by the city at any future point as needed. Granted, the back is largely wetlands, but the front is certainly usable in its present and future reconfiguration if need be.
And Tyler, do you concur? I mean, you've seen lots of properties. Does this one ring any bells? Like you say, you'd be out of your mind buying this. You could never put it to use.
No, I wouldn't say that. There are wetlands on the site, but I don't see anything hidden that would raise any concerns here.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, I would say that due to the, historical use, kind of a lot of earth movement out there, the previous kind of development, kind of the soil piles, I think there's actually more, how would I say it, I guess, a better opportunity to redefine kind of the limit of wetlands out there. So depending on where you're looking to do development, there is a chance for mitigation and that sort of thing to clean up that back area and improve the wetlands that are there. And a lot of times it comes down to that. If you are encroaching into those restrictive buffer zones, those opportunities can help.
Mr. President, may I follow?
Yeah, go ahead.
Then Tyler, stick with that theme for a second. If the city were to acquire it, what do you think the city would do that might prudently be done to that site to improve the protections that are there? I'm thinking particularly about stormwater management, but that may not be the only perspective that you bring to this.
I think ways to improve it. A lot of sites we see that they demarc the 25-foot no disturb zone, so there's no future encroachment. So say a property is sold, any homeowner that goes there or a new business, it's defined. That way there's not going to be soil piles deposited. And honestly, in doing the soils analysis out there, that's kind of why the line is so jagged on the backside of that property. It's from old fill and that sort of thing. So we'll prevent that in the future.
Does anyone else want to chime in on that one too? I'm wondering if there's anything else people might recommend before we go down this road.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, when you say demarc, what do you mean? What do you mean practically?
Typically, a lot of, and Julia, you can chime in on what your report typically likes, but a lot of times we demarc it with 4x4 posts, that usually have a no disturb zone.
So it's a physical feature that you install.
Exactly. Yep. And
Okay.
they're usually put on, the approved plan. So then any plan later on, it's, you see it.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, we've, just to add to that, we've done that on plenty of sites throughout Newburyport, where and again, in terms of what jumps out at me on this particular site, we've seen developers come forward with proposals for work on sites with much more wetland constrictions than on this site, much more. So this doesn't look terribly intimidating in terms of wetlands to me, and I don't know if Joe or the other commissioners would agree in relationship to some of the other sites that have been brought before us. But that said, the commission does like to make sure that there's no disturbance in the 25-foot no disturb zone. And so oftentimes they will ask a homeowner or developer to demarcate that zone so that after the development is complete, after the house is built and everyone's living there or whatever it might be, that everybody knows where that 25-foot no disturb zone lies or where the wetland line lies, and not to go back there, not to build a swing set back there, not to put a new parking lot back there accidentally when no one's looking. So oftentimes we'll have them put granite bollards that say this is where, this is where the 25-foot no disturb zone starts, or sometimes a split rail fence with a sign on it that says conservation area, no disturbance beyond this point, that kind of thing. We've done that and plenty of other permits throughout the city. So, and this is an opportunity to do something similar like that. And again, it's usually comes along with an order of conditions where the commission will require those things to be put in place after construction.
Good, thank you.
Counselor Khan is next.
Chair, I will defer to other counselors who haven't spoken yet, if you
Oh,
are
yes,
doing that.
I beg your pardon. Counselor Lane has not spoken yet, and then Counselor Tantar.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Since we're in the discussion of contaminants a little bit here and some testing, I'm just curious, is there increased restrictions on the allowable levels of contaminants in the soils in wetlands?
Yeah, I guess either Tyler or Commissioner or Julia, any of you?
One of the Wetlands Protection Act require one of the interests or I would say functions and values of wetlands is water quality and maintenance of water quality and improvement of water quality. That's a function of a wetland. And so when we protect wetlands, we're protecting their ability to provide for water treatment and removal of pollutants from water. So we don't get into levels of what can go into a wetland or out of a wetland. We try to make sure that there are no point source discharges from any source, whether it's polluted or clean, into a wetland. Everything has to be filtered and go through some sort of stormwater management or sediment removal system before it would enter a wetland. But we don't get involved in water sampling and testing for specific contaminants and things like that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, or if you have any additional sort of technical understanding of it than I do.
Tyler, do you have anything before I go to Commissioner Warhol?
Nope, I have nothing to add.
Okay. Commissioner, am I pronouncing your name right?
It's Warshall.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Has the city had a licensed site professional review the property and done an analysis of the historical use here to determine whether there may be contamination at the property?
And that's
This is Andy Poon. I could probably best address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So posted on the city's website, for those who may not be aware, I think the councils are all aware, is 2 studies that were done by a licensed site professional. Both of them were commissioned with the expectation that the city might be buying the property. The concern there was that we look into those exact issues. So we hired through the regional planning agency, we made a connection with Credera Associates. They are going to be speaking to the council about the same issue later on this week. But basically what they found in a phase 1 of report of the site was that they did not believe that there were any reasons for doing further soil testing on the site, feeling that there were contaminants on the underground. But they did recommend we do some additional testing in the building, which we then did, and to look at lead, asbestos, and PCBs that are sometimes in the caulking around windows and things like that. So we did do those assessments. Both of those are posted on the city's website underneath the Planning and Development Department. On the left tab there, there's a link there, but that information has been provided for folks to view.
So phase 1, but no phase 2 outside, Commissioner.
Correct. The LSP determined that phase 2 testing, in their opinion, was not necessary. The only phase 2 component they felt was appropriate was what they call the hazardous building materials survey, which is where we got the information on lead, asbestos, and PCBs.
Council President, if I could follow up.
Please do.
So did they just check out the building, or where in that picture that's up where all those trailers are there and where they've parked Army vehicles over the number of years? I'm just curious if they looked in that area where that 25-foot setback is in terms of doing a second phase and doing some test borings.
They did not. I will let the consultant obviously speak to that in much greater detail for the members of the council, but in a nutshell, they did not do any physical testing on the site. What they do as part of the phase 1 really is look at historical documentation, and so that the PDF that's actually posted on our website is something like 1,049 pages, because it includes all the historical records they were able to obtain from the property owner, from the EP, and so forth. Looking through those records, including 2 particular cleanups that were done already on the property that were tracked through the typical process, they determined that there was not a need for additional testing here. They did not, and I think the LSP will reiterate the same, indicate to us to do additional testing either in that area where the trailers are or anywhere else on the site. Essentially, that was one of my original concerns in wanting to get a phase 1 and phase 2 assessment of the site, was given that it was used as a garage historically, just making sure that we had done our due diligence, looking into possible soil contamination, if oils or gases had drained from vehicles. So that's why we had them commission that report on our behalf. What they found was, and I did press them on this after receiving their written report, said, you really don't feel there's any need to do additional testing, and that's the position that they have on that.
So if they were to say that we wanted a phase 2, we needed a phase 2 done by chance, we weren't allowed to do that anyways, correct? Is that right?
Well, we never got to that level of debate with the state. Essentially, the state was not interested in having additional borings or investigation done on the site, but we didn't really press that question either, because our own LSP had determined that they didn't feel it was necessary here on this site. So we never went back to the state and said, look, we hear you have some concerns about testing done on the site before we acquire it, but our LSP, said they wanted us to do it, or they think it's in our responsibility to do it. In this case, our own LSP was saying to us, we don't think you need to. So, but what we do recommend you do is look in the building. So.
Well, let's put a pin in the LSP. We have a calendared hearing for Thursday specifically to talk to the LSP, but I think what we sussed out and Julia answered is essentially in wetlands, there's no level of contamination that's permissible, right? I mean, so for wetlands purposes, I think we've covered that, I think. Am I right, Julia?
Correct. And Max, perhaps to the point is that these are different jurisdictions, regulatory wise.
Okay, and then Councilor Warshall.
Commissioner.
Commissioner, sorry.
The issue regarding potential contamination is not really relevant to the discussion here tonight. Then we're really focused on the wetland issue then, is that correct?
Yes, but we have the benefit of you all tonight. So, if it's something that in the course of your work, you do pay attention to, that's one of the things we're trying to understand. So,
Okay.
So it sounds like it sounds like it is something that you pay attention to. So are we missing something? I mean, hypothetically, if there were petroleum in the soil, what would that mean for the Conservation Commission?
Do you want to answer that, Dan, or I can address it?
Go ahead, Julia.
So, Councilor Eigenman, like we've said before, we are not LSPs, and it's not our jurisdiction to sort of oversee or get involved in the operation of a site cleanup. But we would want to make sure, if we knew there was contamination on the site, and this has come up, and some of the commissioners might want to, chime in about it, but this came up on at a project on State Street last year, and there are plenty of other sites in Newburyport that have contamination on them that also have an order of conditions, or that we're also involved in permitting projects on. And so in those cases, what the Conservation Commission pays attention to is making sure that during construction or after construction, or whatever the case may be, that there's no impact from those contaminants, additional, let's say, additional or new or exacerbated impact to the wetland from those contaminants. So whether it's during the removal of the contaminant process, where are they going to stockpile those contaminated soils? Well, we're not going to let them stockpile those soils within 25 feet of the wetland. We might not even let them stockpile those soils, if possible, within 100 feet of the wetland. And then we want to make sure that it's properly covered and managed and removed from the site in accordance with all applicable regulations, that kind of thing. We want to make sure that if there's disturbance of contaminated soils, and then there's a rainstorm, that there isn't then flow from that area into the adjacent wetlands or water body or whatever it is. So we pay more attention to it in that sense, rather than in actually trying to oversee how that gets cleaned up. We just assume
That's very helpful. That's exactly what I was hoping to suss out. Councilor Lane, are you okay for now? Again, the crossover with wetlands is absolutely germane. I don't mean to cut you off, but if it's LSP specific, we'll do that on Thursday.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Councilor Tantar, you've not spoken yet, right?
No, I have not.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to just get back to water and in particular a notice of intent, which would include a stormwater management plan. And my understanding of what Julia said is that any kind of plan to develop the uplands, the area closer to Low Street, would have to demonstrate how stormwater would be handled. And my understanding is there are two aspects to that. One is there could be any development could not result in any increase in the water leaving the site. I think that's, and then the second one is that there could be not be any decrease in absorption on the site, and I imagine that is linked. However, what I'm concerned about is if there's development in the front and you can't move any water off the site, would that move? That would move water back. All right, and so there could be in what's now the wetlands. I would imagine it's the Conservation Commission's concern that, two aspects. One, as you said, any water that moves from the front to the back would have to be filtered and cleaned. And I'm asking that as a question. Is that true? And secondly, are you concerned about the impact on the wetlands of an increase in water in the back? And would it have to, I mean, because when you say the site, it's the entire site. It's all of Lot A1.
Yeah, no, I follow you. Commissioner or Julia, can you help us? What happens with drainage going into the wetlands? What does it have to be filtered, as the councilor asked, et cetera?
Yeah, so if there was an increase in impervious surface, let's say on the site, so thereby you'd be increasing the amount of stormwater runoff that isn't being infiltrated naturally through the ground, that water has to go somewhere. And since you can't have, or the goal, again, this is a redevelopment site, so the stormwater management standards for redevelopment are that you have to meet the standards to the extent practicable. You don't have to meet them exactly. They expect that if it's a redevelopment site and you can improve, then that's better than not doing it at all. So that's just an aside. There is some sort of flexibility when it's redevelopment, but aside from that, you're increasing the amount of runoff on the site by increasing impervious surface. That additional stormwater needs to be handled somehow without flowing directly into the wetland without treatment, or at a higher rate than currently it flows into the wetland, thereby causing erosion and sedimentation impacts and things like that. It would also have to make sure it be clean. So if it was coming off of a parking lot area where there could be oils and greases and other contaminants, that would have to flow through some sort of stormwater management system, like a grassed swale would be considered a way of treating that parking lot runoff. Water from a rooftop is considered clean, so that would just have to be slowed down. And I'm not an engineer, civil engineer, so I shouldn't really be talking that much about stormwater design, but those are the types of things that would have to be looked at in terms of handling additional stormwater on a site like this. But this site also is, there's already a lot of pavement and there's rooftop already on it. So depending on what type of project someone was proposing, maybe there's not that much of an increase in impervious surface on the site. And oftentimes we see projects come forward where they're going to decrease the amount of impervious surface on the site because they're going to add grassed swales and they're going to add more plantings and things like that. So it's hard for me to say exactly how it would be handled on the site, but it would have to be a stormwater management plan would have to be submitted along with the notice.
Yeah, thank you. Just one follow-up, Mr. President.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So if there were, I mean, the wetlands back there is not restricted, obviously, to lot A1. I mean, it's a contiguous wetland. All right. So, I mean, would you have to assure that if there's an increase in water in the back part of this lot, that could not move around to the rest of the wetlands and contiguous properties?
Well, and again, so the point is not to necessarily make sure there's no increase in the volume of water flowing back to the wetlands. Again, because it's a redevelopment site, they might not be able to meet that standard or some other standard, and perhaps there is an increase in the flow back to the site. Typically, you like to look at the drainage, those sort of watersheds on the site, and see where things are flowing and try to maintain that. But if you were to add more water to the wetland back there, yeah, it would move around. Maybe it has the impact of decreasing some of the upland area, maybe not. But the goal is to, like I said before, the stormwater management standards, and you'd have to talk to a civil engineer to get a little bit more detail on this than I can give you. But that's why you want to maintain infiltration capacity so that you have water that's absorbing into the existing ground. So you're getting groundwater infiltration. You don't want it all to run off. If there's, you want it to do what it's sort of doing naturally, which is some of it infiltrates, maybe some of it runs off. So you try to sort of balance those things through the stormwater management program that you're going to design for the site. The point is not to have an adverse impact on the adjacent resource area. And that's what on any type of stormwater management plan would have to be put together by a civil engineer who does all the calculations. They do very detailed modeling and calculations for how all the water flows and gets treated, and to ensure that they can meet those standards. And then again, we would assume that if they're meeting those standards to the greatest extent practical, after having reviewed it ourselves and had John Eric review it and potentially even a peer review, if it was a very complicated site, we would feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So now we're going to go back to Councillor Khan.
Yes, thank you, Council President. I do want to point out John Eric is on as well. So since we're on this topic, can we defer to if he has more to add, or can I just ask my question?
Yeah, let me just find him.
I've just allowed him to speak if he's available. John Eric?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, tell us about best management practices.
Yeah, sorry about the delay. So, I mean, Julia did an excellent job, and it's to the greatest extent practicable. And generally what that means is there's room for, there's always the ability to redevelop. It's just a function of how much is too much. And that's where the civil engineer tries to recharge. The problem with this site is the industrial park, the business park is all clay. There's like a 10 to 20 foot layer of clay. And the DEP stormwater policy, it requires infiltration, but it also acknowledges that when you have B soils, it's very difficult. So I missed the part about any contaminated soil. You don't infiltrate if there's any contaminated soil. So I missed that whole discussion. But in general, I don't know how far Julia got because I didn't hear her entire thing. But you can redevelop the site. You just have to minimize the increase in pervious. And I don't know if that helps. I don't know where everyone is at this discussion. I do apologize. I very much apologize.
That's okay. I just to help you out. What Councillor Tontar was asking about is, given the water has to go somewhere. So say we do increase the pervious surface, the councillor's point was it probably has to go back into the well. And so then Julia was explaining, if it's off the roof, it's clean. It's considered clean. You don't have to treat it or filter it or any of that. But if it's off of parking lot, you probably do, because it has oil and gas and all that. And then, and then the counselor asked a follow-up question about the volume. And Julia was explaining that it's not necessarily forbidden to increase the volume of water that goes into the wetland in the back. That's what did I get that right, Counselor Tontar? Sorry, he's muted, but that's, and so I guess we wanted.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so what we wanted, since you're our engineer, we wanted to know, well, what kind of best management practices are there? Because Julia is not an engineer.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry, Counselor, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you started to say that, you know, we don't have a complete palette to work with because the soil in this area is really clay.
Yep.
But what kind of BMPs could we do?
So that question is very simple for civil engineer. So our DPS building is a very good example down the DPW yard, and it's right around the corner. It's the same area, all clay soils. We did some test pits, and I mean that clay was very deep, like 10 feet. So what you do is it's a conventional detention pond, surface detention pond. You attenuate the soils. You attenuate the runoff. You hold it back, and you control it. You control it that way. Infiltration not needed in clay soils. That's the part of the stormwater policy that will allow you to be exempt from infiltrating in these soils. Some engineers still try to do it to the greatest extent practicable. I don't even recommend it in clay soils. It's just a waste of money. It's not even worth it.
Yeah.
So the long-winded answer is a conventional detention pond.
Got it. No, that's helpful. And we have one, you say, at the DPS building.
Yeah, and what we did is for the runoff for the DPW, the parking lot, is we put in a storm scepter. And you don't have to put in a storm scepter. There's all kinds of other devices, but every one of you already hit it right on the head. Water quality, yes. Parking areas, yes. Treat it, remove the oils, separate the oils. And there's many devices that you can use for that. The roof runoff, it'll still go into a detention pond, but you don't have to treat it.
Got it. Thank you, John Eric. I'm going to go on to Councilor Wallace.
Actually, can I?
Oh, I'm sorry. You weren't done. Sorry. Put your hand back up, Councilor Wallace. Go ahead, Councilor Khan.
Well, no, I kept deferring to others. I think what I just want to get clarification on, and I think I heard Commissioner Teixeira say this, and that was, again, going back to the front along the adjacent to the street where we talked about, the man-made swales, or if it's now being classified as an intermittent stream. Commissioner Teixeira made a statement in terms of however we define to have consistency within the industrial district classification, and that being the precedent in terms of the install before 96. So I just wanted to make sure or get clarification on that, because from what I'm hearing with stormwater management, these are critical kind of aspects of the system. And so are we, just to get clarification before we move on to the back, I just want to make sure we're kind of clear along the kind of WF, the wetland flag markations along the front area. Is it safe to say, and maybe John Eric or our wetlands scientist here could clarify, is the underground pipe or any of those drainage swales, are they considered under stormwater management system, or are we saying those are wetlands? And I guess I didn't hear a clear answer to that. Thank you.
Well, if I could, Councilor, we have John Eric now, so he's sort of a new player. Maybe to help you, John Eric, we were talking about this. We think it's a 1970 ditch that was put in when they did the middle school. And
exactly.
And it was delineated or flagged. Sorry, it was flagged by Tyler Ferrick, who's on the line. And so we were going over, well, how do we deal with it? And Commissioner Teixeira, Chair Teixeira pointed out, well, he realizes that there's a 1996 bright line rule in the regs, but that doesn't work in our business parks. That's what Councilor Khan is alluding to. I guess I'll shut up in a minute. What I would add is, what about a best management practice for drainage from this property into the 1970 ditch? Would that be necessary? And then go ahead and answer Councilor Khan's question.
So let me start over. I think I understood your full question about discharging to the ditch. I mean, my understanding is that a lot of times wetland scientists flag wetlands that end up that truly are stormwater ditches, and I want to say it's kind of no fault of wetland scientists because they've been trained to identify wetland species. But if the origination of the ditch was for roadway purposes, and then the wetland species end up growing, and no one maintains it, which is the case here, hardly any cities maintain all the ditches the way they should. You get a lot of wetland species growing. So handling this after it was flagged and submitted, well, the NOI hasn't been submitted. So what I would recommend is reflag the property, and I would ask the wetland scientist, who I believe is on this meeting, like you said. My vote would be that the wetland flag, it's not a wetland out front. To me, it's clearly not a wetland out front. That was built for roadway purposes. So for starters, before I continue, does that help?
Well, okay, I hear you, and that's kind of where Commissioner Teixeira and also Julia were saying that's basically the practice in Newburyport, because of the business park, has all these pre-1996 swales, ditches, whatever you want to call them. I got that, and now you're caught up. But from your telling us about BMPs, I've got a different question, which is, can we discharge? Can we discharge to that ditch?
Oh yeah. I mean, you probably won't, Counselor, because the way the grading is in the site. I know. Everyone knows
it slopes back the other way. I just want to make sure I know the facts. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd be fighting uphill, and it's just not worth it. Yeah.
So, Councillor Khan, do you understand John
Yes.
Eric's position? Okay.
Yep. Well, wait. So you said that's just John Eric's position. I guess I'm just, here we are with the Conservation Commission as well as the Wetland Scientist. So I just kind of want to get our expertise. I don't want it to be characterized as opinions. I really just actually I'm not a wetland scientist, so I'd like to get kind of the expert kind of perspective on this. So
who,
that we're
absolutely. Who are you want to direct it to? Tyler?
Maybe
this is Andy.
Maybe Tyler.
Tyler, are you still on?
Yes, I'm still on.
All right.
So Tyler, in your experience, I do kind of see the characterization of how, and I think you may have said this earlier, where, you look at the vegetation, the soil, you mark, you put the wetland flags there. In your experience, are you sometimes collectively doing that, whereas some things might be these type of man-made swales, but in your job, you just mark everything and then maybe understand that might be.
Yep. So usually at the start, a lot of times we don't know the history of a site. So when we go out, we do flag typically everything. Once we work with the engineers, suppose they put in a drainage structure, back in like 4 years ago when they did the development of the site, we'd be able to pick up those BMPs on the site plan, so we could make those wetland lines that we had on there non-jurisdictional based on those plans. But the Wetlands Protection Act, the regulations, how they're written is, everything before, of course, way back in New England, there's a lot of man-made ditches, streams throughout, history. So they are jurisdictional, because if we were to say that those man-made things weren't, that would be a large portion of the wetlands that exist today. And that's sort of why the regulations were written that way and tailored, that when those stormwater ponds, ditches, channels are made, that they are marked on a site plan, so we know it, versus natural wetlands and that sort of thing. But I guess what it comes down to is, at this point, it's the town's discretion on, I would say, their jurisdiction of, accepting a variance for doing going within that 25-foot no disturbance zone in that particular instance versus the natural wetland in the back portion of the property. If that makes sense.
Counselor Connor, you have more?
Yeah, that's actually confusing me more because now I'm hearing that we need to do a 25-foot no disturbance from that is what I thought I heard.
Counselor, this is Andy Port. If I could speak, I think
Yes.
I think what the combination of what I'm hearing, and I think maybe Joe and Julia could probably speak to this better from the local Conservation Commission permitting perspective. Tyler, of course, preparing the plans that would ultimately be subject to their review. I think that what you've pointed out here, what's been the question that's been raised is what is the jurisdiction, the expected jurisdiction of that, blue dotted line that we see on that graphic that John Eric, the city engineer, had pointed out, which is a swale that is shown on a 1970 roadway drainage, conveyance. So if Julia or Joe could speak to it, but given that you look at these plans on a regular basis, and you've mentioned before how drainage swales, are dealt with in the business park, is it reasonable to conclude that however the plan is submitted to the Conservation Commission, that the commission might look at the flags that are pointed out at that upper drainage culvert there and actually determine that those are non-jurisdictional and in fact only approve the wetland boundaries at the back of the property as being jurisdictional?
Does that mean, sorry, just one more question then. Does that mean, and I think I heard this from John Eric, is that an activity, and this is again, comes down to maybe the process with the Conservation Commission, is that there is a, when a project comes before any notice of intent, does the wetland delineation, which we just heard has maybe this 3-year life, does that just get, I saw that this was a certified design and stamped, the wetlands delineation done that we have Tyler here speaking about, but is that something that would need to be, this kind of consideration? Does that get redone, or is there anything that needs to be kind of presented to Conservation Commission and get remarked? Like, how are these things kind of discussed? Is this where the Conservation Commission is familiar with these kinds of projects and you guys can understand when you see these, what exactly they are?
Let me help out Joe, because he has the practice. So basically, this is the delineation by the professional wetland scientist. He's flagged it. He's said he thinks it's jurisdictional because it's pre-1996. Now what happens once it reaches your commission?
Well, I don't believe the commission would consider the wetlands flagged at the top as actual jurisdictional wetlands. For us, in our experience, it's clearly a roadside drainage swale, and you have a stone head wall at one end of it. From Tyler's perspective, there are wetland plants in there, but there are wetland plants probably in 99% of the swales around the city. So we're not going to spend much time worrying about or even paying attention to wetlands like that. The wetlands at the back of the property are what we're concerned about.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe, if I could just add quickly, Joe, I agree with Joe, and I think the commissioners would agree as well, but I want to just sort of make sure that we're not getting too bogged down in semantics about this, because like we said before, whether this is considered a jurisdictional wetland or a roadside ditch or both, no one's going to go in and fill, the commission's not going to allow, issue a permit to fill that intermittent stream, drainage ditch, swale, whatever it is. That's going to be protected. The question is whether or not you can do something within the buffer zone around it with the 25-foot no disturb or the 100-foot buffer zone. And I think what Joe's trying to say is that's not the buffer zone that we're concerned about. The Wetlands Protection Act allows work within the buffer zone. Our ordinance allows work within the buffer zone. And there's even exemptions in our local ordinance for work within the 25-foot no disturb zone of stormwater features that have been flagged as wetlands with wetland vegetation in them. This was an exemption that we put in years ago for a project on, or I should say, in conjunction or associated with a project on Perkins Way, and it would be applicable here. So that's why I don't want us to get too worried about what we're calling that feature, the intermittent stream along the roadway, swale, whatever it is, because we would handle it, I believe, the same regardless of what it's called. And the commissioners can correct me if I'm, misinterpreting how they would see that. But I think Joe sort of hit the nail on the head. And I feel like we're spending a lot of time worried about that one little area when I don't think that it's really extremely important to how this site would be approached during a permitting phase.
I hear you on the practicality, but I think that the reason why Councillor Khan and Tyler are having the exchange is because we are trying to understand legally what's required. We understand, again, it's crystal clear as a practical matter. It's a drainage ditch for a road. And so the commission doesn't pay attention to the 96, but what we heard from Tyler, because that was that under state law, he does believe it's jurisdictional. And so there is a buffer zone. So as you said, in a 25-foot buffer zone, you can do things in the buffer zone, or you can get a variance. That's all we were trying to suss out.
Yep, and I agree with that. Is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was helpful actually going through this. So thank you, everyone. And Commissioner Teixeira, that was helpful too, how you just clarified it. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. I believe I have the order straight now. Councillor Z.
I think you had Councillor Wallace because she was called on.
You're right.
And then
I'm sorry.
I'll
I
come
don't have
after
it
her.
straight. Councillor Wallace, then Councillor Z.
So just a couple things and maybe just some questions, kind of absorbing all this. Just to jump in on the stormwater piece of it. John Eric is correct. Infiltration is not feasible here for their tough soils. You also can't infiltrate when you're that close to groundwater. In some cases, it's like 2 to 4 feet. So probably what you would see on the site are like a vegetated wet swale or like a constructed stormwater wetland. So those would be surface type of BMPs. Because the site is lower than the road, most likely everything would be going back towards the other wetland. And because the site is so flat, it might be hard to even put traditional catch basins and pipes because you'd have to outlet at the elevation of the wetland. So likely you would have just, surface type structures, but they can be done, aesthetically pleasing with plants, and that'll get your water quality, quantity, etc. The concern though is if you have a large building proposed on the site, you only have limited space. So, when you go to do your site layout, you have your building, you have your parking, and you have your green space. And you have to, when you do your schematic plan, you have to take the stormwater into account about where that's going to go. And again, for redevelopment, you do the best you can. You generally want to make the site better than it is in existing conditions. But so this kind of leads me to my next question for the commission. If you have a wetland area, generally, especially like this site in the back, generally in the spring and early summer, it's going to be pretty wet, pretty squishy. We have a wet backyard, so I know it well. But are people allowed or children allowed to play in the back area? Or how does that work if an area is designated as a play area, but it's a wetland?
Commissioners.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I think in general, in a site like this, we would ask the city to have some sort of a barrier, whether it's a split rail fence, preferably a split rail fence. We wouldn't be wanting kids to be playing in the wetland or anywhere near the wetland, really.
Okay. And
All right,
then,
well, Go ahead,
go.
Counselor, keep going.
And then my other question is, and this may be a question for the LSP, but in the back there, there's some upland. And I know in a LSP report, they mentioned that some of the hills back there were man-made. And just looking at it, doesn't seem like there would be natural hills back there. Is there any knowledge of any sort of like dumping areas back there or man-made hills? So if there were anybody going back there, I guess you just want to make sure that it's safe. I'm just, anybody who has any sense of the topography back there.
Mr. Ferrick, you were back there. What do you make of the mounds?
Yeah, from what I recall when I was out far back, I would say beyond, yeah, I guess it was right around wetland flag A34. There were some mounds there. I didn't dig into the soil. There was vegetation growing in there. Nothing that really caught my eye, so to speak. I don't recall any big debris that was around there. But again, you know, this was last year. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any firsthand knowledge? Andy? Julia?
Yeah, this is Andy. There's some small mounds in that area. And I remember that being of interest when I was out there as well, but they're not very tall. It's, you know, maybe a foot or two off the typical grade, and then they go back down again. And it's in the area that Tyler mentioned there,
All right. Well,
flag.
I guess we'll ask the LSP on Thursday what he thinks. Councilor Wallace, you all set?
Yes, one more question. Just kind of getting back to the neighbor's property, and maybe a question for the commission. What do you typically see when you have a project come in? Is it 100 feet you're supposed to flag a wetland? And if it's on somebody else's property, how is that usually dealt with?
So Tyler first, Julia next, I guess. Or Joe, go ahead, Joe. What do we do with neighbor's property?
Well, it's the neighbor's property, and the person flagging the wetlands, unless they've been given express, permission to go on the property. This is kind of typical as to how our wetlands delineations end. Sometimes they'll take a little stroll on the adjacent property, but with this property, there's a house right there, and I'm not surprised that the lines end where they do.
Councilor Wallace, are you set?
Yeah, that's so if your site is right next to a property though, I mean, I don't know if there's wetlands on the other person's side. I assume there's some, but at what point do you say that's all right? Or at what point do you have the applicant go try to get access to that property?
Councilor Wallace, if I could help out a little bit with that. There's a couple things that if we suspected, if it looked like, they just artificially stopped the wetland line because they had to because of a property boundary, and we suspected that there were additional wetlands back there that would have an impact on the extent of the buffer zone or the developable part of the subject property, we would first, or I would, and the commissioners and I would look at the aerial photography, the state mapping of wetlands, and see if there's any indication that there should be wetlands in that area. If there's any sort of hydrologic features marked on USGS maps or anything like that. And we would also look up old records for the neighboring property to see if there was an old order of conditions that had a plan. If there was an order of conditions issued for the neighboring property, we can assume that there are wetlands there. But so you just have to take it site by site. There's no real rule of thumb about how we handle it.
Councilor, this is Andy Porter. If I may also point you back to something that Tyler had mentioned earlier. If you look at this plan here, the wetland flag A1 and A2 that are furthest up towards the street along the section, he had mentioned earlier that he did not flag any further up towards the street there because essentially, if I'm not mistaken, that wetland essentially turns back. That strip there turns back towards downhill, essentially away from the street. So that was the reason why he did not feel a need to flag any further towards the street, because the buffers, that resource area end and the buffers from it, the radius lines that you see, wouldn't be extending any further on the portion of the property that we were inquiring about in the first place.
And just one more quick note, and then I'll be done. Just with regards to the front swale of, is it an intermittent stream or is it just a ditch? A lot of times you're going to have differing opinions, and if it's not, for whatever proposed project comes, if it's not, a critical issue, then it's not very controversial, as Julia was saying. If it's something that's going to affect your development plan, then it might become very controversial. And even if the Conservation Commission votes on the line, on a wetland line, the residents or whoever are able to appeal kind of to DEP. So there's always that risk or that ability for, I guess, taking it to court. But I would imagine that normally happens, on areas that are really, like the project hinges on it. And in this particular case, maybe that's not the situation. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Z, you're next, right?
I'll yield to Councilor McCauley. He hasn't spoken yet, then I'll go
Well,
after.
you're just screwing me up now. Councillor McCauley.
Yeah, Councilor Z, why don't you go ahead? You've been waiting forever. I'll patiently wait my turn.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Just to jump in, I know it's getting late here, so I just wanted to offer some thoughts of my own, not necessarily maybe just one more question, but it seems like the front part of the site is a debate for people that have more qualifications than me to have. But as looking at it from a practical standpoint, I kind of worry about that front part in terms of, keeping the stream flowing or not. So whether you end up coming to the conclusion that it's jurisdictional, or you come to the conclusion that you want to get the wetland scientist to basically change what was drawn, which makes me scratch my head. But let's say you go to that conclusion, there's still you still have to sort of be careful around that. So that's a concern. On the other end of the site, which we spent some time on, but this concept of demarcating the 25-foot buffer is another sort of pressure on the site. The gravel lot that we talked about briefly is another area of interest. And so I just wanted to offer my conclusion. I mean, I don't come out of this meeting feeling hugely confident that this is a great site for development. So the difficult thing here, and I think some of the challenge we're having in answering these questions, is we're trying to play both the city and the developer, because guess what? We're both the city and potentially a developer as well. So there's a question of what you can do, and there's a question of what you should do. And that's the question I'm trying to ask myself, and maybe ask others to chime in as well. But I don't leave this meeting thinking, wow, this site is great and really sort of free. I see a lot of constraints that do play in. Now I understand Councillor Connell's point, at large Councillor's point about, well, do any of these rise to the level of not buying the land? Well, that's another question too. But clearly there's more at stake here, or more in discussion than just whether we should buy the land or not. And I'm of the mind personally that we really need to start making some decisions here on some of these potential uses, as Director Fort stated as well. And I just wanted to offer that conclusion while it was fresh in my head. It seems like both ends of the site have some challenges, some small, some large, some need to be overcome. It's not clear to me what the cost would be. So like in a lot of cases, you could say, well, anything can be done, but for a price. And I don't know, I guess I'm just not feeling great about it. And I wanted to state that on the record and publicly. So I will leave it at that, and I'll yield to the council president or Councilor McCauley, whoever's next.
Thank you. Councillor McCauley, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just have one question, and it kind of dovetails off where everybody is going with this. And I've asked this question previously, not tonight, but in another meeting. And maybe now that we have the plan out in front of us, can anyone delineate for me what would be the area that we would consider in play that could be developed that might not have restrictions that can't be overcome, that, you know, I see here it's 2.17 acres, but we know it's not that. We know it's what? I don't know. Is it half an acre? Is it a quarter of an acre? Can anyone with expertise comfortably suggest an area that is, let's say, in play? Thank you.
All right, well, that's a tough one to see. I mean, the commissioners probably are going to be unlikely to say that because they don't have an application before them. However, I don't want to discourage them. Julia certainly has the most staff experience. Anyone?
Yeah, can I just comment on that? Unless any of the commissioners would like to speak, they should go ahead. But I think I can speak for them in saying that we see much wetter sites than this brought forward for development projects, sites with much more restrictions. And so, and like you said, Councilor Eigerman, it's hard to comment on what is a developable area on the site or not without a proposal in front of us. But you can see the buffer zone lines, you can see the 25-foot no disturb line in the wetland lines, and you can see that where that sort of stream is and swale is at the front of the site, which would have to be maintained in its current capacity. So, you know, there's plenty of things that could be done on this site. If someone were to design something, we would look and see how far it goes into the 25-foot no disturb zone. And if it did, then that would require variance. And if it required a variance, the commission would have to look to make sure that there were no other alternatives and that mitigation was being provided in the form of plantings or stormwater improvements, et cetera, and that it served a significant public benefit. And so once you start considering those things, a lot of flexibility on a site like this opens up. Even what was brought up previously, which was actually not just 25-foot no disturb zone impact, but actual wetland impact can be allowed under a variance for our ordinance and legally under the Wetlands Protection Act, as long as replication is provided. And there's area in the back of the upland island for replication. So there's just tremendous flexibility, I think, and I wouldn't want you to look at this as like drawing a line of what's developable and what's not, because it's absolutely would depend on someone's creative thoughts about what they would want to put there. That's all I can really say. I don't know if the other commissioners or the commissioners themselves would like to comment further on that.
Well, a follow-up to that, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have this squiggly line here, which I'm assuming is the fence, right? Is everything this side, everything road side of the fence in that creative area, or does it go beyond the fence into you know, beyond the fence into the back part of the lot?
That's up to, yeah, go ahead, John Eric.
Yeah, I raised my hand. I wasn't trying to chime in without being offered. So this happens all the time. I've been doing this in my past life, and I would be the person that would take this plot plan, and the developer would hire us and say, "Hey, what can you do with it?" First thing we do is we go to the zoning, do the setbacks for buildings, accessory structures, parking. So get all the setbacks. Work with the local wetland regs. For us, it's a 25-foot no disturb. That's pretty understandable. You can build a lot of things inside the 100-foot. This particular site, Councilor McCauley, the way this would, to truly answer your question, you need someone to spend a couple days, look at the zoning, look at the regs, draw lines, draw setback lines, and then you end up calculating what area is left. Then you need the information from the developer, in this case, Youth Services or someone else in the city, whatever our desire is to build it. And we need information, what size, how big of a building do you need? What do you need? Do you need outside basketball courts? Do you, how many parking spaces? We will look at the local zoning, how many parking spaces are required for that use. The use is usually per square foot of the building structure. So there's a million ways to skin this cat. The most aggressive engineers and civil engineers, I'm sorry, most aggressive developers and civil engineers teaming up, the most aggressive ones would wipe right through this wetland, put in something to get access to the back, and then try to convince the local Concom to replicate those wetlands somewhere else. And that's aggressive. Would I recommend that? No, I never operated that way. There's no benefit for doing that here. The upland area in the back is very small. If anything, it'd be for walking. So that's off the table. I'm just giving the counselor an answer. So really, it's drawing up all the setbacks, defining what your developed goals are, and then see if it's worth it. I didn't look at the use services proposed plan for developable. I understood there's some kind of feasibility study. I didn't get a chance to look at that. But, you know, if you ever need someone to look at that, and I could do that in our office, if that helps. I don't know what the time frame is for this project. That's my 2 cents.
And
So,
one
thank you.
more thing on top of what John Eric just said is if you want to strictly say, what is the developable area from a Conservation Commission perspective without a variance, the developable area is everything outside of the 25-foot no disturb zone. I think I said that before, but just to make it very simple.
Yep.
The developable area is everything outside the 25-foot no disturb zone, period, unless you go for a variance, which according to our regs, you can, if you meet those criteria. That's it.
And
Okay.
that's where the aggressive developers come in. The aggressive developers come in pushing the variance. I just want to emphasize, I'm not a proponent of that. The Concom probably wouldn't entertain it. I'm just saying that's what they do.
Got it. Councilor McCauley, you set?
Done. Thank you. Thank you very much for your answers and your support. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, Joe, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to add that pretty much, you know, the back part of the lot is not going to, you know, the front wetland line, you know, the front wetland line, and really the 25-foot buffer is what we're going to consider the limit of work. Nothing in the back is going to get done really, and even with the wetlands, increasing the wetlands or replicating the wetlands, that's kind of a tough one back there too, because you have to go through all the other wetlands to replicate, unless they did it further front. So.
Thank you, Joe. I could swear that Councilor Khan was next.
I think was Councilor Zede before me. Sorry, I just saw his hand was up too. I could go. Sorry, I know it's getting late in the hour, and I really want to thank the Conservation Administrator as well as the Wetland Scientist expert, because I am getting a better sense, and I know Councilor Zede mentioned his kind of thoughts, and I know we're not debating this or the cost of getting into that in this meeting. It's really just focusing on the viability of this project. And from what I heard just mentioned right now, which was helpful from commissioners as well, this is not unlike anything what you typically see before you. And I was actually looking at some of the other maps of previous projects you guys have in front of you. So it seems like, knowing Newburyport, we're kind of used to some of these situations. It's really how you could work through a project. And to me, the stormwater management piece was really, really helpful to understand. And looks like there are opportunities that can be handled. So I just want to thank everyone. I thought this was a good takeaway for me, and I actually learned a lot and have a good perspective. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Zede, did you want to speak, or are we?
I'll yield. Thank you.
Well, you can't yield because there's no one to yield to.
Oh, okay. Go to sleep. That'll be what I'll do instead.
All right, Councilor Wallace.
So to bring up another topic, since we didn't get there yet, questions on the gravel area that's there that I had mentioned.
Yeah,
in my
let's
memo.
try to hit all the last issues quickly, because remember, the commission's been at it since 6:45.
Right.
Why
I
don't
just
you get
wanted
it-
to
yeah,
make sure
yeah,
we get
it all
that.
out. Yep. Gravel. So what's the commission do with this? We think we know what happened. What do you do?
Well, Joe, do you want to take this or do you want me to? All right. So, this is a tough one. This happens all the time. Typically it happens on Plum Island, or someone calls and says, hey, guess what? My neighbor has this, new shed, and I know that it's not allowed because I had to get a permit for my new shed. And then we say, well, did you see them put it up? No, I didn't see them put it up, but it's there. Well, do you know when they put it up? I'm not sure. And we look at aerial photos and it was a long time ago, or we're not really, it's really tricky. It's technically, it's a violation if they encroached in the, into a wetland area or within the 25-foot no disturb zone. In this case, it's really hard to tell because the wetlands weren't delineated on this site back in 2017. City doesn't own the site. We weren't responsible for it necessarily. I don't know if we were using it or not at the time, but we didn't have this wetland line that we're looking at now back in 2017. And actually, if you look at the aerial photography, if you look at the MyMap system and the state's wetland mapping, if I'm right, and I could be wrong, but if I'm right, I don't think it shows wetlands into the site the way that the wetland delineation we have before us now does. So it could be that someone looked at MyMap or looked at the state Mass GIS wetlands layer and said, oh, there's no wetlands near here, or at least we're further than 100 feet away. And they just went ahead and put the gravel down and parked their cars and thought nothing of it. It could have been that. So we don't have the benefit of going back and saying, you guys knew that there was this wetland here, and here's the wetland line, and here's what you did, and it's a violation, and now there's enforcement, and you have to remove the gravel and revegetate, et cetera, et cetera. It's complicated.
Well, if I may, and I know we're almost done, but it's a little different than Plum Island because we've been using this site so that the city was there at the time, right?
It's fun. Yeah, of course it's different than Plum Island. If the city was there using the site in 2017 and the city put down the gravel, that's the city's issue. Then that's the city's problem for us to look at this now. But like I said before, back then it could have been very easily that no one thought to ask us about it, ask the Conservation Commission about it, because there was no wetland, no indication of a wetland in that area.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't, but it would be in the 100-foot buffer.
I don't know if it would be. Again, you're asking me, I'm sorry, I can't really answer this because you're asking me how I would deal with this and I don't have all the information about what took place in 2017. Was there an indication that they were within the 100-foot buffer zone at the time or not? I don't know. I don't have that. So it's hard for me to say. There's a lot of things that would have to come into play for us to know how to approach a violation like this.
And that's your decision, or who makes the call?
Well, it would have to be brought before the Conservation Commission as a potential violation, I guess. Typically when something like this happens, it happens on Plum Island a lot, so I'm just going to use the hypothetical that a neighbor calls and says, hey, this violation took place on this property, I want you to look at it. We would say, okay, and we would start doing some investigating, and we would look at some historical photos, and we would talk to the property owner and find out what happened at the time, and we would ask them why they did it. Did they know what the regulations were? Do they know that so it's just, it's hard for me to address this right now. This is actually the first time that it's been brought up to me specifically in this way. So I don't have information from 2017 other than these photos.
Okay, Councilor Wallace, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I think the reason I just happened to notice it in the photos, and the reason I'm concerned is because it does affect where the wetland line is flagged now. Because if you look at the wetland flag, it's like a linear, like right along the gravel area. So the question is, would the wetland flag have been different 2 years ago? As far as enforcement, that's for you guys to figure out or whatever. But it's just a question on the wetland line. what that means going forward.
Okay, anyone else? We've been at it for a couple hours, 20 minutes. I want to make sure, and I am very grateful that you guys, I know, Joe, you don't usually do these joint meetings, so that's helpful. Counselor Zede, I think you're going to get the last word. Go ahead.
I just wanted to think about the next steps. So we have the another hearing on Thursday. That's again BNF, P&D, and Committee of the Whole, where we have the LSP. Everybody I think knows about that. And then I will work with Chair Shan, but our next Budget and Finance meeting is January 28th. So that would be next Thursday. And I think we discussed maybe having some deliberation that date. I don't know if Chair Shan wants to say anything, but I just wanted to throw that out there that those are kind of.
Well, I'd like to deal with that without the, boring the commission with it. Can we do that on Thursday?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So Joe, we're going to get out of your hair now. Did you have anything else on your agenda? We could just vote to adjourn ourselves, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, we were gonna discuss, we're gonna continue some old.
Okay, all right. Then let me get us out of your hair. I would entertain a motion to adjourn the special meeting of the city council.
So move.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, Joe. Thanks a ton.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Conservation Commission, can I get a motion to close the public hearings? I saw lips move, but mics were off.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, Paul Healy,
Yes.
Steve Moore,
Yes.
Dan Warshall,
Yes.
David Vine,
Yes.
Ron DeCola,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And I will raise an objection for doing that because the city council could all say aye and nay. All right, so I would like to get some Plum Island updates if we can.
Unmute myself, sorry.
Oh, before you do that, Julie, I want to thank Tyler and John Eric for chiming in tonight.
Absolutely. On a sec.
So, Plum Island.
We have, wait a minute, are there participants here? No, okay. Yeah, thank you very much, John, Eric, and everyone else. So Plum Island, I assume you guys all took a look at the pictures that I emailed of Reservation Terrace and the damage out there. So the mayor had a phone call this morning with Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of EOEA and Senator Tarr and DEP and some others to talk about short and long-term solutions for out there. And it's hard to even use the word solution because I don't know that there really are any, but there wasn't much progress from that meeting. It was a lot of discussion and sort of educating those other folks about what this kind of situation we're in and asking them for help and them, offering to start working on it with us. So MEMA was there and they offered to work with the city on helping some of those residents in that area if they want to elevate their houses on pilings, if they want potential buyouts and things like that. So that's something that would maybe be open for discussion with some of the residents, because I know at least one resident out there is staying at a hotel right now, had to leave his house. And if the damage gets worse, and you could see from one of the photos that the roadway is now being undercut on the water side, if that continues to get worse, it could cause the city to have to shut off water and sewer for the neighborhood, which I believe is something like 18 homes. So there's a lot to work through out there and not a lot of apparent good solutions. That's where we are.
Oh, when they put the core bags, I forget how you pronounce that, down on the central part of the island, I mean, they seem to work fairly well because they're larger than the you know, the super sandbags that we just used.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sort of reluctant to suggest any short-term solutions because they don't seem to work at all. But those did seem to be, they lasted a couple of years down there.
Yeah.
They were a lot more expensive.
Well, that, yeah.
Yeah,
And
chime in whenever you want, Counselor Z.
Oh,
See your mi-
thank you. Yeah, I don't want to cut anybody off. I'm happy to speak too. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just thought I would stay on for the update as well. I was out there yesterday taking a look, and you know, unfortunately, the road has been severely compromised. You know, a lot of it has broken up. DPS took out, from what I understand from a neighbor, you know, a significant amount of asphalt was just taken out. It was just broken up chunks, and there was a concern last week about, you know, even if you could do something, what does it look like to get equipment out there? And if you go out there now, you can pretty much see underneath the road. So the water is going underneath the road. It goes out underneath on one side and comes out on the other side. That's how compromised it is. So that's definitely a significant concern. The vast majority of the bags, I apologize, I didn't see the photos, but I'm just imagining what they look like since I was out there. You know, they're all sunk down into the sand at this point. So they're not really providing any measure of protection, and the block wall that had been there since the late 70s, from what I've been told, you know, is just sort of really destroyed or trashed. It sort of fell forward towards the water. There's parts of it that are exposed now. You can actually see where the line goes, where it used to go connect to the other line of blocks on the other side beyond the paper street. So if you're on Reservation Terrace, you cross the sort of paper street portion and then you get back into the pavement. The situation is just, it's absolutely miserable, to be honest with you. I mean, it's very disheartening for the efforts that have been made out there, and residents are very despondent, and everybody's looking for a solution. And that solution, you know, is a question of physicality. What can you do out there? What could you do out there? Physically, literally, what could you do in terms of equipment? And then obviously you have the regulatory side, which is your area of expertise. And then you have the funding side as well. And I have to profess my frustration or disappointment. I'd hoped today's call would have been more productive, since, you know, Julia knows this well. We've been, you know, and residents know this well. This isn't like a yesterday problem. This is a 5-year problem that's been brewing over time. So it's pretty bad. If you haven't been out there, it's definitely worth a spin just to see it for yourself. It's almost unbelievable, honestly, even from 2 years ago or 5 years ago, when the kids were out there planting seagrass on the freshly nourished dune. So it's just bad. It's just bad all around. You know, so any creative thinking is really welcome. And I just don't, I mean, I had spoken to Julia and said, well, what about, you know, maybe resetting the blocks back to existing conditions, the ones that are out there, not the ones that were removed. But again, we're back to the physicality problem that there's concern about driving equipment out over the street. So it's just sort of a confluence of problems that are very challenging. And so if anybody, you know, I think this is like, it takes a village kind of problem. Any ideas, I think, you know, brainstorming would be more than welcome. I don't know if that helps add to the conversation at all.
Sharif, I didn't mean to say that this wasn't I mean, it was a useful meeting this morning. It was helpful in that the state is talking with us and is offering their help and is going to start, you know, hopefully helping us put together some ideas. But it's just that there weren't any, you know, earth-shattering new ideas that came forward this morning.
Other than 500,000 cubic yards of sand, I don't know what's gonna, you know, if you reset the blocks, there's no beach for the, you know, you look at this, there's no beach, and they're just gonna get immediately undermined and lean forward again.
And Anders at GZA suggested that 2 options that he could think of that would actually potentially work. One would be driving like steel sheeting down, and the other would be essentially stone and like creating a stone revetment, which would have to be huge and extremely expensive. And, you know, there goes your beach in that situation as well. So
DEP probably wouldn't allow either of those either. I mean, just, they would not.
Yeah, the sheet pile, they're not gonna allow, and there'll be even less sand, you know, there'll be less beach there, but that's it's clearly a desperate situation.
The only thing I can think is if there's such a thing as a temporary solution or an emergency allowance in this case. I mean, for something.
I think that's what you should be probably prepared for, is for them to come with some sort of request for an emergency something or other. We don't know yet.
Them as in DCR?
DCR and the city and the state, I don't know. I mean, we wouldn't be able to pay for this either. As Sharif can probably attest to, whatever the solution would be right now is probably going to be fairly costly. So my guess is that DCR and the state are going to be getting involved in something. Sharif, do you have any thoughts about what?
No, I mean, look, there's no question. I think money is a perennial or forever challenge, right? And in the past, I think that in previous iterations, we've approached the issue from the money side first and said, what kind of money can we get? And then figured out how to best deploy it. In this case, given the situation, you know, I think there was general consensus that getting the regulatory aspect squared first made more sense, because, you know, coming to this problem with another 20,000, 40,000, 50,000, probably just intuitively we know is not going to provide you with, you know, any sort of measure of work here. You need something more substantial. And that's why I think the pathway was directly to the Secretary of EOEEA to say, okay, what do you want to do? And then I think the next battle, that's why I'm, you know, I had gotten notes from today's meeting, and I sort of had this built up that we would get a plan or something today. I guess that's why I feel a little bit disappointed, but you know, we'll take the good, which is that at least they're listening and they seem to be understanding. We're trying to warm them up, so to say. I wish some of them would come and see it for themselves. So there's no question money is a big challenge, always is. But I think this time around, we are looking to square away the regulatory aspect first. And so if there is any dispensation for, say, a temporary sheet pile, I know temporary is a very favored word, and I think anything would be temporary here, then great. Then the next battle is, okay, how do you make that happen? And I don't know the answer. I do know that the city, you know, we bear substantial risk here on the city side, of course, the infrastructure, which we talk about endlessly. And then we have a lot of valuable property, which, you know, continue to receive their bills and they pay them. And so that's another sort of risk for us. And it's just, again, there's just we're cornered, frankly. There's no other way to say it.
My fear of putting in temporary steel is that you're just, because of the wave refraction off of that, you're just going to move the problem upstream and downstream, and you know, maybe even make it worse. I don't know, David, maybe you could speak.
That the end scour, which is happening at the end of the jetty, that'll get just moved down to the end of the sheet pile, because those waves all come right in and turn right at the shore. It's
one good thing that did happen today is DCR released a study that they have been working on for years called the Upper North Shore Regional Sediment Management Study. And it looks, and I think I've mentioned this to you all before, they hired an outfit called Applied Coastal Inc., which has worked up and down the East Coast on this type of sediment transport issue. And they basically did an analysis of how the current's moving in the mouth, what that's doing to sediment transport, and then what the solutions potentially could be. It's a really, I'm going to send it to you when I get it. It's a really dense and full of critical information kind of a report that should guide any long-term solution out here. But essentially what it says is that the problem is the jetty, which we all know, and the real solution would be a weir in the jetty, which is something we also all know. The question is how to get the Army Corps of Engineers to agree to do it at this point without taking 30 years. So.
I just wanted to add too that, you know, about the end scour comment, because I think that's a fair point, and always a challenge with this is you don't want to move the problem around. But I just want to say that every storm we go through, this, what you're looking at in this photo is definitely ground zero. I mean, this is the heart of the problem, but it's also pretty amazing to go and walk down towards 69th Street or up the other way, more towards, say, 73rd, 77th, et cetera, or 77th, pardon me. I mean, the scour there, for example, yesterday, there was a telephone pole that was previously like fully buried. Now you can see like, several feet of it below. They've already removed the power off the pole and they're waiting for Comcast to come out and move the cable so they can get rid of the pole. They put a new pole in on an emergency basis. So I guess my point is that every storm, every year, the expanse of the problem grows. The 69th Street area, which is still relatively safe in the grand scheme of things, especially when you compare it to what you're looking at here. The scour there and the steepness of the scarp is actually pretty amazing. So unfortunately, I guess what I'm trying to say is one argument for not sort of just saying, okay, well, I don't know that we can do anything here, is that we're actually growing the problem in both directions anyhow. And so that just increases the number of homeowners. It increases the amount of the sewer system that's at risk. And that's what I kind of hope DEP will factor in when they think about, okay, if we allow something temporary, what are the pros and cons? And a big pro to me is we've got to start shrinking this problem, not growing it, because it's just going up and down. And you can kind of see it in the distance of this photo, but the foundation for the old Coast Guard building, I mean, all these things that were never exposed before. And again, every storm, even this one this past weekend, which I think most of us would regard as a nothing burger in the grand scheme of New England, wasn't even really a full-on nor'easter, was again just pretty detrimental, especially here at ground zero, but up and down as well.
Has there been any serious consideration given to buying the property owners, buying them out? Because sea level is going to continue to rise.
Yeah, that got brought up today, actually, by MEMA, the woman, Samantha Phillips, I believe works for Mass Emergency Management. And she said she would be willing to start talking with the city about, looking at buyouts and incentives for people to elevate their homes. So whether they would want to or not is another question.
No, elevation would take care of the immediate problem with the really local folks, but it, like what is it, Dauphin Island and all the places down south that, their house is now 15 feet in the air on piles because everything eroded underneath it.
Yeah, I mean,
We're talking about a whole neighborhood here because this is water and sewer gets shut off. It's not just these houses in front.
Yeah.
This home here in the edge of the frame is, I call it like the battleship house. It's the gray one with the blue decks. That's on pilings there. And Julia probably knows this house well, but they used to park their cars underneath it. And just to give you a sense, I mean, yesterday, it's probably filled in with 8 feet of sand underneath. So that the distance between the top of the sand and the bottom of the building is like 4 feet now or 3 feet. It's almost like a crawl space. And the home behind that one is the one that got absolutely destroyed in the April storm. And again, another thing you see when you go out there is the high water mark. It's probably up to my waist, right, or halfway up the windows on the bottom floor. The house is not on piling. So just again, giving you sort of a sense on the buyouts. I mean, there hasn't been any serious conversation on the city side that I could say I've been a part of or heard of or seen anywhere along the way. If the state, I don't know if the state has a program to that effect. It's not clear to me, but honestly, I don't know that that's what the residents want anyways. I think that that's a tough sell for a variety of reasons. Not that it shouldn't be considered, everything's on the table, but just kind of giving you the realities of, the situation out there.
Oh yeah, no, I'm well aware of the realities. It's not a good situation. But
and one last thing, I apologize. I mean, I think, I'm concerned that we're going to get back into the territory of self-help. And I know that, that has its own whole world that goes with it. But I do think, there's a lot of frustration, and I just don't know where this goes in that respect. And I know that self-help is not generally, it's not really considered a good idea, but people also are feeling like they're at the end of their rope. So I don't know if one thing we could do is try and if a resident does want to do something on their own property, could we help them in some way to do that? You know, maybe that's something we could talk about. I'm just trying to find a way out. I mean, I really think we're one storm away from losing a house, or you know, it's that serious. So, you know, I don't know all the ins and outs of everything, but fast tracking stuff or offering some help and some consideration for that may yield a better situation than just people sort of going off and doing what they wish,
Yeah,
which can have its own detrimental effects.
the problem with the self-help and one property owner doing something like happened in Newbury means they've transferred it to their neighbors. Because I remember when they did all that self-help out there, I remember somebody's deck somebody who didn't put up any stone, their deck got wiped out. You know, everybody else's property was fine and their deck got wiped out because of N-scour. So, you know, that beyond that, our hands are tied by DEP. You know, we could say, oh yeah, go ahead and do that, and DEP will come in, and if they haven't agreed with it, they'll come in and you know, and hammer everybody involved.
The state, you're right, Joe. The state is going to have to tell the city what they will allow right now. Short term, medium term, long term. And I think there might be a short term, medium term, and long term here. I don't think it's just a short term, because we don't have time for something significant in the short term. There needs to be, like Sharif said, the next storm. It's just, that wasn't even a large storm over this past weekend. And look at these blocks. So we need something immediately, and then we need something sort of temporary, and then we need the real long-term solution. And they're going to have to be letting us know what that can be. And I think we're on the way to that. I think that call this morning was them agreeing to do that for us. We just need to see what that's going to be.
I think the best long-term solution is, like you said, get a weir in the jetty.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to get our representatives and senators to light a fire under the Army Corps to get that done.
Yeah. Well,
and that starts getting into the going back. I think it's a 202 or something like that, Julia, where they caused the damage, or they acknowledge it, but they have to study it first, and that could take forever for the.
It's called the 111 study. Remember talking about that? They did it down in Sandwich, and they just succeeded to get Army Corps to agree that they were the cause of a bad erosion problem down in Sandwich. It apparently, according to CZM, the process of that 111 study took 30 years. So we find a different way.
well, at least we have two senators that may be chairs on relevant committees that can light a fire under the Army Corps.
Supposedly there will be a meeting. When I talked to Senator Tarr's office last week, there was supposedly there's been headway on getting a meeting with Army Corps. And my personal view is I don't see a problem with using a 111 to maybe try and get the conversation going on a dredge. So yeah, it might take 30 years to get them to acknowledge. I mean, remember for those of us on MRBA, they put themselves on trial and then they found themselves not guilty. If you recall, right, they published a 2-page report and said, well, the jetty had nothing to do with it. And the groans in the room, I'll never forget them from the neighbors. So, but if a 111 helps push the timeline up on a dredge, then maybe that's a useful exercise. And this isn't the first time I've mentioned that. Everybody sort of regards the 111 as a third rail. So you have to approach it, you want to be careful with it because you want to have a good relationship with the Army Corps. But in this case, I think there's general appreciation, I'll call it. I won't call it consensus or agreement that the jetty is a big part of this discussion. So any sort of effort on that is certainly, would certainly help. Anything would help, any attention to it or consideration or discussion of it.
Right. We need to make sure that the Army Corps picks the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard dredge to get on their list of projects to be done, because the Army Corps has already said they'll transfer, what, 250,000 or something cubic yards or however much it was to protect the end of the jetty. So, which protects this area.
Yeah, that would be offshore placement of sand, but it would nourish the whole island, so.
Well, they were talking about putting tens of thousands of cubic yards in the, right behind the jetty there too.
Well, the sand from the Piscataqua would be, they were gonna deposit, like, under normal circumstances, they would deposit it off of the Isle of Shoals.
Yeah, okay.
We would have to pay for them to bring it down and do near shore placement off Plum Island.
Yeah,
Plus
But
it's,
the Merrimack sand, they could
There was
put
a
on.
Merrimack dredge that was gonna go there.
yeah, it's glacial till too, so it's not ideal, I think, it's not great for beach
Right,
placement.
right. No, it was the Merrimack dredge. Sorry about that.
There's a lot of sand out there for us.
Yes,
You just get it.
there's tons of sand. Just not where we need it. All right. Anything else?
Just thank you for including me and welcoming me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
You're always welcome, Sharif.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We have anything else?
Nothing.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, Paul Healy,
Yes.
Steve Moore,
Yes.
Dan Warshall,
Yes.
David Vine,
Yes.
Ron DeCola,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And I want to be able to do a voice roll call. Where's Andy? I want to yell at him. All right. Good night, everybody.
All right.
Night.
Good night.
Thanks, Joe.